At the beginning of Chapter 1, the villainess stood before two figures and laughed at them with open disdain. She was Arachne, the first demon and a member of the Demon King's Elite Four. With mocking curiosity, she questioned the man before her, recognizing him as the first world hero. Declaring her intent, she announced that she would not allow the Demon King to claim him, as she intended to turn him into her own puppet. The man calmly told his companion that there would be no issue even if they did not defeat the mid-boss during the speedrun. Instead, they would bypass the encounter entirely by exploiting a bug. His companion reacted with visible shock at the audacity of the plan. All of this was unfolding within the game RTA Summit, which was being broadcast live on massive billboards and had already been watched by audiences in Tokyo hours earlier. The commentator's voice rang out with excitement, announcing the arrival of the final climax, the last glitch. On screen, the game character leapt into action as the player behind the controller pressed the buttons in rapid succession. Through precise execution, the character struck down Arachne. The commentator declared the finishing time, 25 minutes and 56 seconds. It was an astonishing achievement, an overwhelming new world record set by the so-called speedrunning emperor, Shichiku Taiti. Shichiku Taiti held the world record for the game Another Verse. RTA, or Real-Time Attack, was a competition in which players began a game from the very start and raced to clear it as quickly as possible, a practice widely known as speedrunning. Although exceptional skill was expected, competitors also utilized glitches, exploiting programming errors to save precious seconds. Techniques included running along railings that were never meant to be traversed, clipping through walls, progressing while the menu background remained active, or performing soft resets to skip cutscenes. Ordinarily, completing Another Verse, a monumental and densely packed action RPG, required over 100 hours of gameplay. Yet here it had been conquered in just under 26 minutes. The commentator expressed disbelief that such a day had come, that a game of such scale could be cleared in so short a time. Taiti scratched his head modestly, remarking that he had somehow managed to pull it off. The commentator added that even the most difficult glitches had been executed without apparent risk, praising the performance as quintessential Shichiku Taiti. Taiti responded that the results still felt unbelievable. Speaking into the microphone, he mentioned that during his usual speedrun practice streams, viewers likely grew tired of hearing his solo commentary. He expressed gratitude to everyone who had supported him and to his fellow competitors for exchanging ideas and strategies. When asked what reward he would give himself upon returning home, Taiti replied that he would be working over the weekend under his boss's orders. The commentator concluded that it had been a fitting run to close the RTA Summit, thanking Shichiku Taiti and expressing anticipation for seeing him compete again in the latter half of the year. A comment on the stream claimed that Taiti had missed the final glitch. He read the remark while seated before his monitors, the glow of the screens reflecting in his eyes. Without hesitation, he gripped his controller once more. Under his breath, he muttered that even after practicing more than 1,000 times, the success rate of the final glitch could not even reach a stable threshold. He continued playing until only 30 seconds remained on the timer. In a low whisper, he insisted to himself that he could perform better than this. Even the early game wall clip, he thought, could have been smoother. Frustration slipped from his lips as a curse. He gripped the controller tighter, pressing the buttons again with restless determination. A single word escaped him: sleep. Suddenly, the world around him vanished, and he plunged into a black dimension. Disoriented, he struggled to comprehend what was happening. A solemn voice echoed through the darkness, invoking the stars beyond Nirvana and the goddess of a great land floating at the galaxy's edge, transcending centuries. It spoke of the moment when celestial bodies overlapped. The voice declared that it would heed the goddess's will and grant blessing to a lost soul crossing the vast darkness. In a flash, Taiti fell elsewhere. He opened his eyes to find people surrounding him, their voices murmuring that the ritual had succeeded. He wondered where he was. A woman stood before him, and behind her others whispered in awe that the miracle had occurred. The great summoning performed once every 100 years had been completed, all thanks to the sky goddess. The woman ordered that word be spread to the citizens of the capital. The summoning had succeeded. The hero had appeared, though some doubted his strength. For 5 years, they had been locked in battle against the Demon King, with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. The woman introduced herself as the kingdom's princess and the saintess of salvation, Ida. She explained that through the once-in-a-century summoning from beyond, she had called forth Taiti, an otherworldly hero. She requested that he lend them his power. The demons, she said, poured endlessly from the roots of evil, protected by the evil king, Demon King Apocalypse, and his 4 demon generals. Unless the roots of evil were sealed away, the destruction of the human world was inevitable. Taiti, she declared, was their final hope. Kneeling before him, she implored him to grant his strength to defeat the Demon King. Taiti stood in confusion. No matter how he looked at the scene unfolding before him, it was unmistakably the opening cutscene of Another Verse. It was an introduction so familiar that he had seen it more times than he had seen his own parents' faces. The conclusion formed easily in his mind. He had played Anverse too much, and now he was dreaming that he was inside it. Ida raised the holy sword. The blade said to banish evil, an heirloom passed down through the royal family for generations. Taiti reflected that he always played the game in third-person perspective. Yet now everything unfolded in first person. He wondered if he had somehow selected different settings. He disliked motion sickness and always avoided first-person mode. He lifted his hands and examined them. His limbs responded exactly to his will, moving as naturally as they did in reality. It was an astonishingly vivid dream, as though he had fully dived into the game itself. Within his mind, a singular thought crystallized. If he had the chance to play in such a divine environment, then he had no choice but to speedrun it. Ida urged Taiti to take the holy sword. Without warning, he bolted. Startled, Ida ordered the soldiers to stop him, but Taiti sprinted toward the castle wall instead of the exit. To everyone's horror, he ran straight into the stone and passed through it. Ida could only stare in shock as his figure phased beyond the barrier. As he ran, Taiti calmly reminded himself of the plan. First, ignore the holy sword. Escape the castle using a wall clip. He continued providing commentary under his breath as though he were still streaming to an audience, even though he was now entirely alone. The sword was unnecessary for defeating the bosses, and more importantly, accepting it would trigger the tutorial on how to wield it. Skipping the tutorial was essential. Behind him, Ida continued calling out for him to take the holy sword. Realizing she would have to retrieve the summoned hero herself, she formed a series of hand gestures. In an instant, her form vanished. She transformed into her civilian disguise, Danya. Taiti reached the capital city of Falshla and briefly slowed. A member of the capital's adventurer guild, Jian, muttered that he did not recognize this new face. Assuming Taiti to be a country bumpkin newly arrived in the capital, Jian offered to show him around and explain how things worked in the city. Taiti leapt cleanly over Jian without breaking stride, muttering that he had no interest before dismissing him and moving on. Jian stood in stunned disbelief. As he ran, Taiti continued his quiet commentary. That encounter had been the most difficult obstacle in the early game, the Jian skip. If caught by the overly helpful guild member, the town guiding tutorial would begin. However, with precise timing and a properly executed jump step, it was possible to bypass the trigger entirely. The timing window was notoriously strict, and many new speedrunners lost valuable attempts there. Although Jian was beloved among normal players for his friendly, older brother demeanor, being caught meant losing at least 4 minutes, an unacceptable delay in a speedrun. Meanwhile, Danya hurried after him. Along the way, she spotted Jian and asked whether he had seen a young man fleeing the castle. Jian informed her that the man had headed toward the north gate. Danya's heart sank. The hero had departed unarmed, without the holy sword, the hero they had waited 100 years to summon. It would be disastrous if he were to die immediately after arrival. Jian, meanwhile, asked whether he had truly seemed that unpleasant. On the verge of tears, he lamented that it was his first time being so rudely ignored, likening the rejection to that of a suspicious door-to-door salesman. Danya apologized briefly but pressed on in pursuit. Ahead, Taiti announced to himself that he had arrived at the first dungeon. The timer in his mind read 5 minutes and 2 seconds. The forest of the dead stretched before him, an area overflowing with undead creatures. Danya caught up just as Taiti abruptly stripped off his clothes, leaving himself clad only in his undergarments. Her face flushed red as she internally condemned the hero's shamelessness. Unperturbed, Taiti picked up a simple wooden stick from the ground. He stated that the next step was to run straight into the undead horde. Danya stared in disbelief. The hero possessed nothing but a stick, and he was nearly naked. Before she could react, an undead attacked from behind and sank its teeth into Taiti's shoulder. More undead swarmed him from every direction. Danya was horrified. The hero appeared to be doing nothing but absorbing blows. It looked like pure suicide. She could barely stand to watch. Yet to her astonishment, Taiti began striking back with the wooden stick. One by one, the undead fell until none remained standing. He muttered that the intentional damage was sufficient. From this point onward, he would clear the section without taking further hits. Without hesitation, he resumed running deeper into the forest, Danya chasing after him. As she followed, she introduced herself as Danya, messenger of Ida. Danya called out to Taiti that he had forgotten the holy sword, and that with wounds like his, he would surely die. Taiti glanced back at her briefly as she hurried alongside him. She declared that she would cast healing magic immediately. He refused to slow down, insisting that they would still make it in time. Danya could not comprehend what he meant. As he continued running, Taiti explained that this speedrun was set to easy mode. On that difficulty, the early game contained a balancing adjustment. The lower the player's health while racing through the forest of the dead, the weaker the enemies would become, including the bosses. In a proper speedrun, he had an obligation to take as much damage as possible in that section. He further explained that he remained in his undergarments because shirts and pants increased defense, which would interfere with the damage scaling. Danya's voice echoed behind him as she insisted on healing him. Taiti muttered to himself that Danya, The will definitely heal you apparition was now chasing him. She was the protagonist's ally, the NPC mascot who normally accompanied the hero at all times. In ordinary gameplay she was an asset, but in this run she was an obstacle. Therefore, he would sprint out of the forest at maximum speed before she could interfere further. Behind him, Danya continued to scold him, swearing that she would heal him no matter what. At 9 minutes and 43 seconds, Taiti arrived at the castle. Danya caught up moments later, breathing heavily from the chase. He offered her a casual word of thanks as her healing magic finally restored his wounds. Once he had recovered, Danya pleaded with him that from this point forward he must equip proper gear, or else he would certainly die. One of the Demon King's Elite Four resided within that castle, the puppet user Arachne. Yet before she could finish her warning, Taiti had already dashed ahead once more. As he ran, however, he noticed that Danya's dialogue had been slightly different from what he remembered. He wondered if the inconsistency was simply because this was a dream. His thoughts were interrupted when his eyes widened at the sight before him. A spider monster blocked his path. Danya immediately recognized it as one of Arachne's familiars and warned Taiti that fighting it in nothing but undergarments was suicidal. She urged him to retreat. To her astonishment, he was already engaging the creature. His gaze sharpened with focus as he swung the wooden stick. Blow after blow struck precise points on the monster's body. Danya could hardly believe he was attempting to defeat such a creature with nothing more than a crude branch. Her disbelief deepened when the spider collapsed. Taiti calmly explained that this technique was known as the strange rod glitch. By striking the mini-boss continuously at specific coordinates with the wooden stick, the weapon's attack value bugged out and multiplied permanently to 1024. Compared to that, the Holy Sword's attack value of 60 was effectively worthless. The wooden stick had become a genuine cheat item. However, because it was such an obvious exploit, there was always the risk that it might be patched in a future update, so caution was advised. Danya, listening to his explanation, felt as though she no longer understood anything about the world around her. Taiti noted with satisfaction that he had defeated the mini-boss cleanly and obtained the red potion strengthening buff as a drop. That was fortunate. Depending on random number generation, the item drop in that encounter could have been entirely useless. Without hesitation, he advanced into the mid-boss dungeon, Arachne's castle. Upon his entrance, Arachne's laughter echoed through the halls. She addressed him as the otherworldly hero. As a member of the Demon King's Elite Four and Master of Puppets, she declared her interest in him. She mused that humans from another world might make superior puppets compared to the worthless ones in this realm. She proclaimed that she would not allow the Demon King to claim him, for Taiti would become her personal puppet. At 12 minutes and 48 seconds, Taiti stated that he would skip the mid-boss fight by exploiting a bug. To Danya's horror, he walked straight through the wall once again and vanished from sight. Left behind, Danya slowly turned toward Arachne. Arachne's gaze shifted to Danya. Terror seized her. Arachne demanded to know where Taiti had gone. One of the undead servants answered that he had passed through the wall. Arachne replied coldly that she was already aware of that. Arachne denounced the undead as defective failures and ordered them to search for Taiti at once. The otherworldly hero belonged to her alone. Nearby, Danya approached the section of wall where Taiti had vanished, convinced that this was the point he had passed through. She pressed her palm against the stone and slipped through it just as he had. At 13 minutes and 10 seconds, Taiti continued running, declaring that with the strongest stick in hand, he could ignore the remaining 3 members of the Elite Four and proceed directly to the final battle. Beyond the wall lay an outrageous warp bug. By leaping from a certain cliff, he would be transported straight to the deepest chamber of the final boss dungeon. The game was riddled with jank, yet it possessed fascinating quirks. Ordinarily, that cliff was covered by a fall death detection zone, but there was a precise point where the detection failed to trigger. Danya caught up to him and demanded to know what he intended to do. He was meant to be the otherworldly hero destined to defeat the Demon King. If he truly was that hero, then she implored him to save the world properly. Taiti ignored her appeal and explained that to clear the game, fighting mid-bosses was unnecessary. Under speedrun rules, time loss had to be minimized completely. That was how he would become the fastest to defeat the Demon King. Tears welled in Danya's eyes. Taiti announced that he had reached the target point. He would now enter the final boss fight. Without hesitation, he jumped from the cliff. Danya stared down into the dark abyss. After a brief moment of hesitation, she shut her eyes and leapt after him. At 14 minutes and 25 seconds, Taiti used a buff potion during the fall. It tasted unpleasant, but everything had gone smoothly so far. He had successfully executed the Gean skip and acquired a fast strange rod. The first-person perspective he usually disliked had turned out to be surprisingly good. The immersion felt natural. He had even attempted to appear composed in front of the NPC Danya, though he could not recall certain lines of dialogue being present before. He wondered whether the time could be improved even further. Then the thought struck him that this was only a dream. Without measuring the time in reality, the run meant nothing. He recalled owning a VR kit somewhere. Tomorrow was his compensatory day off for overtime work. When he awoke, he would speedrun again. faster than anyone else, faster even than himself. With that resolve, as he descended toward the Demon King Apocalypse, he swore that he would defeat it flawlessly. At 15 minutes and 30 seconds, he landed before the final enemy. The last boss addressed him as the otherworldly hero, condemning the lowly and arrogant human to accept a merciful purge. Taiti rushed directly toward its head, skipping the dialogue trigger. The opening phase of the final boss fight contained no advanced techniques. He evaded the writhing tentacles and struck the Demon King 3 times with his buffed strange rod. The final boss was immensely powerful. For a speedrunner who had maximized attack power at the cost of health, a single hit would mean instant death. But that was irrelevant, so long as he was never struck. He steadied himself on the ground, eyes fixed on the towering enemy before him. Danya watched in awe, convinced that the hero standing before her was impossibly powerful. Barely 30 minutes had passed since he had fled the castle, yet this young man was already overwhelming the Demon King himself. Taiti moved swiftly across the battlefield, darting to avoid incoming attacks. As Danya observed his movements, she became convinced that he truly was someone summoned from another world, someone wielding the mysterious power of a hero. Taiti landed his 3rd decisive strike. At 22 minutes and 12 seconds, the final boss hurled a curse toward him. Believing victory had been achieved, Danya began to celebrate. However, Taiti immediately rejected the assumption, explaining that the second phase of the battle was about to begin. He noted that, ironically, the first phase was actually the more difficult portion. During the second phase, once the enemy unleashed either a beam attack or completed 4 swings with its tentacles, the Demon King would collapse, exposing the head core. Striking that point would conclude the game. Under normal strategy, the remainder of the fight required nothing more than precise execution. Danya found herself unable to comprehend most of what he was explaining. Taiti continued, clarifying that this was not an ordinary playthrough, but a speedrun. There existed an extraordinarily difficult glitch known as the Shichiku step, designed to minimize time. It was a technique he himself had discovered, yet he had failed to execute it during the event. He remembered the criticism written in the comments. Fixing his gaze on the enemy, he observed that the unskippable cutscene was nearing its end. The Demon King would soon begin attacking using random patterns. Whether the glitch could be executed depended entirely on luck. For that reason, he muttered that he needed prayers. Danya could not understand what he meant. In speedrunning terminology, however, praying referred to relying on audience support when dealing with unpredictable events or extremely difficult techniques. The Demon King cursed him once more and launched another attack. Taiti evaded it while analyzing the pattern. The attack came vertically, just as he had expected. If the next strike came horizontally, it would create the fastest possible setup for the Shichiku step. The enemy fired again. Taiti cursed under his breath, recognizing an unfavorable pattern. The Demon King followed with a claw strike, only for its movements to suddenly shift into a horizontal attack pattern. Taiti glanced briefly toward Danya, entertaining the irrational thought that perhaps her prayers might stabilize the attack patterns. He resolved that if he woke from this dream, he would investigate the phenomenon and report his findings to the Anverse study group. For the moment, he continued running, adjusting his positioning. At 24 minutes and 32 seconds, he climbed upward along the battlefield's terrain. After silently offering her prayers, Danya opened her eyes and was stunned to witness Taiti sprinting along a wall. The polygonal surfaces covering the ivy in that area were glitched, allowing him to run across them as if they were solid ground. The most difficult portion was approaching. He could only step on an extremely tiny fragment of falling debris, a surface no larger than a few pixels. The angle and timing had to be matched precisely, frame by frame, before launching toward the exposed head core. At 24 minutes and 42 seconds, Taiti stood above the massive roots, calculating every movement. The Demon King roared in fury, cursing the detestable goddess. Taiti launched himself upward. He leapt toward the enemy and successfully executed the Shichiku step. With perfect momentum, he raised the wooden stick and brought it crashing down upon the monster's head, delivering the decisive blow at 34 minutes and 53 seconds. The Demon King, even as defeat overtook him, declared the act unforgivable and swore to place a curse upon Taiti, the otherworldly hero. Danya stood frozen in shock, unable to form words. After a moment, she managed to tell Taiti that he had admirably fulfilled the mission entrusted to him. She began attempting to introduce herself properly. In Taiti's mind, this was the point where the ending movie should begin. Danya's true identity would be revealed as Princess Ida. Once restored to her original form, Ida would seal away the roots of evil that the Demon King had guarded and usher in eternal peace across the world. That meant the run was complete. He had cleared another verse on easy mode under any percent speedrun rules. He had achieved a personal best in the 24-minute range, and the Shichiku step had succeeded. By his estimation, this was likely the fastest time currently on the leaderboard. It was a strong run. Still, he reflected that perhaps more time could have been saved around the strange rod section. And depending on the new Danya-related technique he had observed today, there might be potential for further optimization. Then he noticed something strange. He questioned why the ending movie seemed slow to begin. At the same time, Danya confessed that she was unable to return to her previous form. Taiti was taken aback. Danya faltered as she mentioned Ida's power. If she could not transform back into Ida, then the ending sequence could not commence. Even though the Demon King had been defeated, she trailed off before finishing the thought. A realization unsettled Taiti. Despite having defeated the final boss, the game had not ended. A chilling possibility surfaced in his mind. Perhaps he was no longer dreaming. Perhaps he was now trapped within the world of another verse, unable to return to his own. At the beginning of the second chapter, they arrived at the capital city of Falschla. The streets bustled with life befitting the heart of the kingdom, and amidst the orderly rows of shops and stone-paved avenues, Danya made her way to a tailor's establishment. The tailor greeted her courteously and inquired about the skirt she wished to order, only to learn that the garment was not intended for her. Before the exchange could continue, the hero abruptly entered the shop, not through the door, but by passing directly through the wall. His sudden appearance shattered the calm atmosphere, leaving the tailor visibly terrified by what he had just witnessed. Later that day, the two of them sat down for a meal. The hero had changed into newly acquired equipment, an adventurer's shirt, pants, and boots, each enchanted to grant an additional 5 points of defense. Danya admonished him to avoid performing conspicuous feats within the capital, warning that such displays would only attract unwanted attention. Taiti insisted that he had merely acted normally, but she immediately dismissed that claim. He maintained that his actions were genuine. Danya scanned their surroundings carefully. With a subtle flick of her hand, she cast a spell to ensure that no one nearby could overhear their conversation. Inwardly, Taiti reflected on the strange turn of events. The game had not ended as it should have, and so, for the time being, he had returned to what he considered the starting point in order to better understand the situation. He explained that his earlier method of entering the tailor shop had not been intentional misconduct, but rather the result of a bug. Because he had continued playing using clear data created through the exploitation of glitches, certain buildings had become impossible to enter through their doors. According to his knowledge, even the Anverse study group had documented such issues. Since entering through doors was blocked, passing through walls presented no problem from his perspective. Danya regarded this explanation as anything but acceptable. She remarked that the situation was far from harmless and that what he described amounted to genuine tomfoolery. She was referring specifically to the glitches. Taiti offered no immediate rebuttal. In his thoughts, he considered how to explain matters properly. Danya was an entity within a game known as Another Verse, and he himself was someone deeply familiar with Anverse. Technically, revealing this truth would cause no harm, but he doubted whether she would be able to fully comprehend it. Danya admitted that his explanation was difficult to believe. Nevertheless, she could not deny what she had witnessed with her own eyes. Glitches resembled magic in their effects, yet she could detect neither the consumption of magical power nor the presence of any spiritual blessing. It was clearly something different, something that existed outside the logic governing their world. The only conclusion she could reach was that it was an external power. That realization led her to a troubling hypothesis. Perhaps her inability to revert to being Ida was connected to the hero's use of glitches to defeat the Demon King. Taiti was taken aback by her sharp insight. He confessed that at the time, he had genuinely believed himself to be in a dream. He had once heard that defeating the Demon King through glitches might cause the ending movie to malfunction. Yet despite having speedrun the game thousands of times, he had never encountered a bug in which Ida failed to revert. The glitches he routinely employed had never produced such a result. While the earlier entrance bug fell within predictable parameters, the issue with Ida lay completely outside his expectations. For that reason, he believed he was almost certainly not the cause. Danya appeared faintly nauseated as she processed his words. If everything he said were true, then her inability to return to being Ida meant that the method required to undo the situation would also lie beyond his expectations. Once again, Taiti was struck by her perceptiveness. He then proposed a single possibility, the true ending. It was possible to clear the game simply by defeating the Demon King, but doing so resulted only in the normal ending. The ending they had witnessed had spiraled out of control due to the interference of bugs. However, if they were to defeat all of the Elite Four and fulfill certain special conditions, they could unlock the true ending instead. Taiti offered a rough explanation. From a programming standpoint, the true ending required the creation of second loop data. When that ending sequence began, all variables would be initialized back to their default states. Such a reset, in theory, would clear out the anomalous effects caused by glitches and restore the world's conditions to normal. Danya's thoughts churned uneasily as she struggled to process the unfamiliar terminology Taiti had introduced. Words such as programming, variables, and initialization. These concepts lay far beyond the framework of knowledge native to her world, and yet he spoke of them as though they governed reality itself. Taiti attempted to summarize his explanation. If they could reach the true ending, the system would reset its variables, erasing the effects of the glitches. In doing so, she should be able to return properly to being Ida. After a brief pause, He raised another question. If she succeeded in becoming Ida once more, would he truly be able to return to his original world? Danya answered with measured certainty. If she regained her identity as Ida, she would once again be capable of wielding the magic that transcended time, the same magic she had used to summon him. So long as a connection to his previous world remained intact, he would assuredly return there. At her words, his hands began to tremble. Danya noticed the subtle shaking immediately. A heavy expression crossed her face as she reflected that it had been wrong to involve him in their affairs from the beginning. He had been summoned abruptly into a foreign world, deprived of choice. She felt that she had no right to criticize him or to stand in judgment over his reactions. From the depths of her heart, she offered her sincerest apology for dragging him into circumstances that were never his burden to bear. Taiti shook off her guilt. He admitted that he genuinely loved the world of Anverse. However, back in his original world, work must have already begun piling up in his absence. He also had ambitions tied to his friends and records he intended to achieve. For those reasons, he needed to return as quickly as possible. Even if he could not determine whether this experience was a dream or reality, being here had brought him undeniable happiness. Danya studied him closely as he paused, gathering his thoughts. He then confessed that remaining idle like this left him unable to calm himself. Without speedrunning, he felt unsettled. The admission puzzled her. He elaborated inwardly on his own habits. Aside from his first 10 completions of the game, every subsequent clear had been done as a speedrun. He had conditioned himself to approach Anverse as a race against time. Now, even while physically present within its world, he felt restless and uneasy. It was as though an invisible timer continued counting down somewhere beyond his perception, pressuring him to move forward without pause. Observing his strained expression and restless demeanor, Danya scrunched her face in exasperation and accused him of being perverse in his obsession. When they stepped outside, Danya declared that their next destination would be the Adventurers Guild. Given the abnormal circumstances surrounding them, it was essential to confirm the state of the world before proceeding further. As they walked, Taiti noted to himself that her familiar verbal quirks had resurfaced. She explained that the guild in the capital served as a hub of information, gathering reports from across the entire continent. If any unusual incident had occurred, the guild would certainly have knowledge of it. Taiti lifted his gaze toward the sky, sensing that something unusual was occurring above. Dana advised him to keep his great deeds a secret for the time being. She explained that the black, swirling mass within the clouds was the root of evil that the Demon King had been protecting. From that source, all monsters were born, emerging as incarnations of evil that attacked humanity. Even if the Demon King were defeated, without Aida's true form, the root of evil could not be sealed. The death of the Demon King alone would not eliminate the threat of monsters. As long as true peace had not been secured, the people could not be allowed to grow complacent or lower their guard. Taiti understood the gravity of this and recognized that it mirrored the same trial of salvation that Dana herself faced. As they continued, he noticed something that caught his attention. Spotting an item shop, he asked to head in that direction. After receiving approval, he hurried toward the shop, but instead of passing through the door, he went straight through the wall, prompting Dana to stop him. Later, as they walked through the city, Taiti took in the scenery of Anverse in ultra-high resolution. The level of detail made it feel unmistakably real, reinforcing the unsettling realization that he was truly inside the game. At the same time, he began to question Dana's nature. Her intelligence seemed far beyond what he would expect from an NPC. Even when he spoke earlier about meta-concepts, she had shown an unexpected ability to understand them. Her speech patterns were too flexible, too adaptive. Even with the most advanced AI technology, such behavior should have exceeded Anverse's official specifications. He had spoken about aiming for the true ending, but that goal depended on the major assumption that this world still operated under the same programming rules as the game. That led him to question whether this world was truly inside the game at all. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a loud sound. Dana looked up in horror as the guard's hunting horn echoed through the city. A guard riding a griffin in the air announced the appearance of a monster. A wyvern afflicted with magical erosion had broken through the barrier and was approaching. The people were ordered to evacuate to safer locations. Dana stared into the sky, her eyes widening as she realized the wyvern had reached the capital. The audacity of the creature flying directly into the city filled her with shock. Suddenly, a massive explosion rang out, leaving her momentarily confused. When she turned toward Taiti, she saw him holding a simple slingshot along with firecrackers. The ordinary-looking tools contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding, as it became clear that he had just purchased the slingshot and was already putting it to use. Taiti treated the situation as an easy victory. He explained that the incident was a fixed event that always occurred the second time someone entered the capital. In his experience, he had already cleared a main quest involving a town being targeted by a flying dragon. Hearing the words fixed and event, Danya's thoughts momentarily stalled, as she struggled to process what he meant. Taiti went on to explain that before he ever began speedrunning, he had played through the game normally. He had conquered every dungeon, obtained all equipment, and collected every item. He had enjoyed completing everything, which allowed him to memorize all fixed events, including both main and side scenarios like this one. Danya remained standing there, visibly confused by his explanation. He continued by describing how this particular battle event was triggered the moment they entered the square, since the wyvern's spawn position was predetermined. There was a brief window before the creature began its attack motion, and during that gap, it could be defeated instantly if struck with a projectile. Taiti then described the method he had used. By firing the slingshot and immediately switching to a one-handed weapon, the animation could be cancelled, allowing the slingshot to be fired again at extreme speed. This rapid input allowed for repeated shots in quick succession. He demonstrated how he had moved at high speed earlier, his body vibrating from the exaggerated motions. Danya urged him to stop moving so erratically and to refrain from using such glitches so openly in public. Taiti reflected that he had simply wanted to defeat the wyvern as quickly as possible before any damage could occur, and he felt apologetic about drawing attention. Danya acknowledged that his intentions were understandable. By then, people had begun to gather and stare. Members of the crowd questioned the strange movements they had just witnessed. Some commented that his vibrating motions were disturbing, while others remarked that humans were not supposed to move that way and wondered where he even came from. A few suggested calling for someone from the guild. Amid the confusion, one onlooker oddly pointed out that Taiti had a cute face, while another questioned why such a comment would be made at a time like this. Someone recognized him as the man who had just passed through the wall into a shop. A shopkeeper confirmed that Taiti had suddenly appeared inside wearing only underwear, casually greeted him, and paid money to buy clothes. As more people reacted, the situation grew increasingly chaotic and confusing for everyone watching. A man suddenly stepped forward and threatened Taiti with a mop, accusing him of being a demon spy. Danya immediately moved between them, placing herself in front of Taiti and insisting that the accusation was wrong, while urging the man to calm down. Another man challenged the call for calm, claiming that the appearance of the wyvern must also have been part of Taiti's scheme. He argued that no normal human moved by vibrating in such an unnatural way. Danya had anticipated this reaction. She understood that suspicion was inevitable, and that it was all a result of Taiti openly using glitches in public. As tensions rose, someone in the crowd demanded that everyone stop. That person declared that Taiti was clearly the otherworld hero. A hooded figure then stepped forward, reminding the crowd that representatives from the castle had recently announced that Ida had summoned a hero for the first time in 100 years, a hero said to possess strength beyond human understanding. The hooded person directly addressed Taiti, asking if he was that otherworld hero, and firmly stated that he could not be a demon. Taiti was taken aback by this sudden defense. The hooded figure explained that she could recognize demons on sight. Her hometown had been overtaken by demons, and her younger sister had been killed by a monster right before her eyes. When she was still a young girl, her face had been burned away. The trauma and torture she endured had awakened within her a skill that allowed her to distinguish demons from humans. According to her, Taiti did not possess the cruel, oppressive aura that demons carried. She reached out and held Taiti's hand, expressing that she had always been waiting for the hero. She no longer wanted to live in fear and pleaded for a world without monsters. Taiti was left speechless, unable to respond. Danya watched the exchange silently. Later that day, even as the situation settled, townspeople continued to walk past, reminding Taiti not to vibrate in such a strange way again. In Taiti's mind, much of what had happened differed from what he remembered, but the old woman's plea matched the scenario he knew. Danya later explained that the old woman's village had been taken over 50 years earlier by one of the Demon King's elite, the Arachnes. It was believed that a horrific massacre had taken place. However, since the area remained under Arachnes' control, the true number of casualties could only be guessed. Taiti reflected that the woman's story was unquestionably part of Anverse's established setting. Yet experiencing it directly was far more heartbreaking than seeing it through a screen. Even though it was a scene he had played through many times, he found himself unable to think of anything to say. Danya added that countless people across the continent shared similar fates. As long as the roots of evil remained unsealed, the number of victims would only continue to grow. Danya paused, weighed down by doubt. She acknowledged that Taiti had already defeated the Demon King, while she herself had yet to fulfill her own mission. In moments that truly mattered, she felt powerless, unable to act. The shared test of salvation no longer felt equal to her. Taiti looked at her and reflected on how, in his own way, he had been the one receiving salvation from Danya. Though his thoughts were shaped by his experiences in the game, he associated Danya with always following beside the hero. Whenever he encountered something terrifying, such as a dark dungeon reminiscent of a horror game, the fear was overwhelming at first. Yet the simple thought that Danya was always with him eased that fear significantly. Even now, in this uncertain reality, he was able to remain calm because he believed she was always by his side. Beyond that, Taiti carried deep affection for her. His feelings were not just functional trust, but genuine admiration and love. Danya reacted with visible embarrassment. Taiti continued by recalling that even in popularity polls among fans, Danya had always held an unshakable first place. With Ida ranked only 8th, he believed there was no way Danya could be considered inferior or without value compared to her. Danya processed what he said about popularity, but then realized the implication of his mention of Ida's ranking. Taiti went on to conclude that, based on what had happened that day, he was certain he could use glitches in this world exactly as he had in the game. That meant this world must be operating on the same programming framework as Anverse. Danya fixed her gaze on him, questioning whether he meant that he would refrain from abusing such systems without reason. Taiti conveyed his belief that Danya would definitely be able to return to her true form as Ada, and that achieving the true ending would ultimately save the world. His casual habit of addressing her in an affectionate, fan-like manner only added to her confusion and embarrassment, a reflection of his otaku tendencies rather than deliberate mockery. Elsewhere, inside the Adventurers Guild known as Ada's Shield, a voice rang out in disbelief. A report showed that in the Wyvern incident involving magical erosion, there were 0 human casualties. Even more shocking, the report also indicated 0 material damage. The adventurer reviewing the document was stunned, unable to accept the results. He questioned whether the investigation had been handled lazily. Another adventurer confirmed that the report was accurate. It appeared that the self-proclaimed otherworld hero had resolved the situation so completely that there had been nothing left to assess. Before the explanation could be fully given, a woman entered the room to ask what all the commotion was about. She was the guild master, and her arrival signaled that the extraordinary outcome of the incident was about to draw even more attention. At the beginning of Chapter 3, Jian, a member of Ida's Shield, the Adventurers Guild of the Royal Capital, remarked that Taiti had quite the nerve to show his face there. He questioned how Taiti could have ignored him the previous day and hoped that the newcomer was prepared for what awaited him. Noticing the gloom on Taiti's face, Jian asked why he seemed to be the one feeling dejected. Taiti responded with a bow and an apology. He explained that Jian had done nothing wrong. His reaction had merely been a spinal reflex. The mere sight of Jian's face caused memories of past mistakes to resurface vividly in his mind. He recalled being subjected to harsh ridicule when he had failed to bypass the Jian part. Hearing this, Jian inquired about these past mistakes. Taiti quickly dismissed the matter as unrelated and asked Jian to pretend he had not said anything. However, Jian began forming his own conclusions. Observing Taiti's expression, he surmised that Taiti was haunted by something he deeply regretted. Perhaps someone important to him had been attacked by monsters before his very eyes. Jian wondered if his own appearance resembled someone from Taiti's past, perhaps a brother. Could Taiti have been blaming himself for lacking the experience necessary to protect him? Reaching this conclusion on his own, Jian apologized and told Taiti not to overexert himself emotionally. Though he did not know the full story, he offered that Taiti could consider him an older brother. Taiti thanked him, bewildered as to what Jian was referring to. Danya sensed that some kind of mutual misunderstanding had taken place, but she chose not to comment. Instead, she informed Jian that she wished to speak with the guildmaster. Jian replied that the guildmaster was currently at the royal castle. He mentioned that the master was likely seeking permission to take on the Elite Four, especially since there appeared to be an otherworldly hero involved. Jian wondered aloud what kind of person this hero might be, unaware that Taiti was that very individual. Taiti thought to himself that Jian truly had no idea. Jian then remarked that it was about time the old sages stopped idling and took action. He asked whether Taiti intended to register with the guild. Taiti confirmed that he needed to. Jian declared it perfect timing and formally welcomed Taiti to Ida's Shield. Later, they were greeted by the guild receptionist, Miemai-chan. She introduced Ida's Shield as the Adventurers Guild of the capital, Falschala. While every city possessed its own guild, Ida's Shield served as the central authority overseeing all guilds across the kingdom. Miemai-chan presented Taiti with the guild administration badge, explaining that it would allow him to undertake quests in any city, including the capital itself. By completing quests, he could raise his rank from F to S, thereby qualifying for increasingly difficult assignments. Ordinarily, registration required passing an examination, but Taiti had been exempted due to Danya's recommendation. Jian remarked that Taiti was fortunate, as the exam was notoriously difficult. He further explained that, as the name implied, the guild operated under the authority of Queen Ida herself, granting it impeccable credibility. Possessing a registration badge from Ida's Shield effectively granted free passage through a city's customs checkpoints. Taiti muttered that it was impressive. Inwardly, however, he already knew all of this information from the official guidebook he had purchased for 8,600 Japanese yen. Jian spoke enthusiastically about life in Ida's Shield, explaining that the quest rewards were relatively generous. Most notably, Queen Ida herself would visit once a year to personally offer words of encouragement. There were even adventurers who joined the guild solely because of her presence. Jian openly expressed his desire to grow closer to her, captivated by her goddess-like beauty. Danya secretly blushed upon hearing this. Taiti leaned toward her and quietly wondered whether she had heard Jian's remarks. Danya responded that, given how Ida's shield effectively functioned as the capital's vigilant core, such rewards were only appropriate compensation for their service. Meanwhile, Mirwan cast a grim look at Jian, who seemed lost in his own fantasies. She declared that there was no conceivable way Ida would be a suitable match for someone like him. As they were in the midst of registering a new member, she struck Jian with a book and ordered him not to interrupt her work. Jian complained that Mirwan had always been quick to resort to violence, to which she sharply retorted that it was entirely his fault. Observing their exchange, Taiti reflected that the dialogue interactions between the characters felt far more realistic than they ever had within the game. He felt a quiet thrill, wondering whether it was truly acceptable to simply stand by and watch. Anverse possessed remarkably elaborate settings for its non-playable characters, to the point of bordering on abnormal. It was precisely this meticulous attention to detail that created such vivid immersion. Even the subquests offered at the guild did not feel like tedious tasks, but rather like opportunities to delve deeper into the world itself. From a hardcore gameplay perspective, it was nothing short of exceptional. Mirwan, he recalled, was an NPC who could not be recruited into a party. She served as a guild receptionist, among many other characteristics meticulously catalogued in an excerpt from the Anverse Study Group's free fanbook. Taiti remembered how he had once trembled with impatience, driven solely by the desire to complete a speedrun. Yet now, looking at these characters in motion, he concluded that Anverse was simply too enjoyable to reduce to a race. Mirwan instructed him to place his hand over the crystallization device. He complied. A hologram-like light materialized before them. Mirwan examined the display and identified the registered name as Shichiku. Jian remarked that it was a rare name and wondered about its origin. Both he and Mirwan commented that it sounded refreshingly exotic. Taiti expressed his thanks. Internally, Shichiku reflected that the name he had used for his speedrun streams was now being reflected here. In this world, there was no concept of being a wage slave, yet the name persisted. Myron's gaze shifted to his level, and surprise crossed her face. He had not leveled up even once. After reviewing the information, she stated that she would explain the process of leveling up at another time and instructed him to wait while they completed the registration. She asked Jian to assist her. At that moment, Danya stopped Shichiku. She asked whether he had defeated the Demon King at level 1. He turned toward her and gave a faintly smug expression, confirming that she was correct, as that was the established speedrun route. Danya clenched her teeth, clearly exasperated that he was speedrunning yet again. He responded that they had time, and that was precisely why he intended to explain it to her. Danya cast a soundproofing spell around them. Within the barrier, he began describing the miraculous revolution of the Anotherverse speedrun. When Danya inquired further, he explained that speedrunning was the act of racing through a game alone, striving to complete it as quickly as possible. He explained that although speedrunning appeared to be an individual competition, he personally regarded it as a team sport. While runners competed fiercely over rankings and constantly sought to outdo their rivals, they cooperated when it came to new discoveries and glitch techniques, openly sharing information for the sake of collective progress. For optimal performance, it was best to reduce the frame rate and never stop moving the right stick. Since Anverse was a game with worldwide popularity, there were approximately 500 runners across the globe, with around 30 based in Japan alone. Danya was visibly surprised by the scale of it. He continued, outlining the fundamental rule of Anverse speedrunning. Defeat the final boss as quickly as possible. However, the Demon King possessed an absurd amount of health and overwhelming strength. The greatest obstacle in a speedrun was minimizing the time required to obtain the bare minimum equipment necessary to defeat him. In the early days, completion time stood at roughly 8 hours, when runners still followed conventional leveling methods and relied on the Holy Sword. Eventually, they realized that abandoning traditional progression and instead acquiring the highest attack weapon available, such as the Obsidian Greatsword, allowed them to overpower the Demon King more efficiently. This adjusted route, which involved leveling only enough to reach the Demon King's castle, reduced completion time to around 4 hours. Further discoveries followed. They uncovered exploits such as the wall clip in Arachne's castle and a mysterious warp leading directly to the final boss's dungeon. Despite uncovering numerous glitches, however, the so-called 2-hour wall proved insurmountable for a long time. Then, like a comet streaking across the sky, a breakthrough emerged. A broken weapon boasting 1024 attack power, known as the Strange Rod. This extraordinary glitch had been discovered 3 years after the game's release. He expressed his desire to demonstrate it to Danya, to convey just how revolutionary it had been for the Anverse Study Group. With the power of friendly rivalry and the assistance of this overwhelmingly powerful wooden stick, runners eventually achieved the impossible, defeating the Demon King in 25 minutes, even at level 1. The difficulty, however, escalated explosively. Since they did not level up at all, it did not become any easier to survive the Demon King's attacks. The margin for error grew razor thin. Danya chuckled and admitted that she had not understood a single word of the explanation. At that moment, Miemai called out to Shichiku. She thanked him for waiting and presented the results of his guild registration. Suddenly, another figure entered. A woman clad in armor arrived. Kira Re-Lechifica, the guild master of Ida's shield. Miemai respectfully acknowledged her presence. Shichiku felt his face flush as he thought that she had finally appeared. Kira, the strongest female warrior in the world of Anverse. In speedruns, he never encountered her at all, so it had truly been a long time. There was also her notoriously problematic character design. Even through a screen, Shichiku had found Kira undeniably attractive. Now that she stood before him in reality, the effect was not merely alluring but bewildering. He glanced awkwardly at Danya and insisted that it was a misunderstanding, claiming he harbored no improper thoughts. Danya calmly responded that she had not said anything. Nevertheless, she sought confirmation, asking whether Shichiku was aware of the relationship between them. He answered that of course he was. In his mind, Kira was Ida's closest friend, and one of the very few individuals who knew Danya's true identity. Miemai quietly remarked to Jian that the guild master appeared to be in a foul mood, and that the atmosphere felt unnerving. Jian wondered whether Kira's visit to the royal castle had once again soured her temper. Kira's gaze shifted to Danya, and she called out to her. Her attention then settled on Shichiku, and she demanded to know who he was. Shichiku introduced himself, declaring that starting today he would be a member of the guild, and that he was the otherworldly hero. Both Jian and Miemai reacted with visible shock. Kira, however, remained silent for a moment before coldly identifying him as the coward from another world named Shichiku. Danya was taken aback by the accusation. Using her appraisal skill, Kira observed that Shichiku was only level 1. She contemptuously dismissed him as worthless. At the castle, she had already heard the account. Although Ida had successfully summoned a hero, that hero had supposedly lost his nerve, abandoned his mission, and fled without even claiming the holy sword. Shichiku now understood how his actions had been perceived. Danya immediately attempted to argue that there had been a valid reason behind his decision. Kira sharply ordered her not to defend him. Drawing her sword, Kira demanded to know how long Shichiku intended to mock the people of this world, and even Ida herself. She hurled a sword toward him and commanded him to pick it up, issuing a challenge to a duel. The guild, she declared, had no need for level 1 weaklings or cowards. Miemai anxiously asked Jian what they should do, fearing that Shichiku would be killed. Jian insisted that they had to intervene. Kira told them to calm themselves, stating that she would use a wooden sword. Though Shichiku's bones might break, she assured them he would not die. Jian hurriedly attempted to reason with her, but she silenced him. She added that if Shichiku refused to wield a proper sword, he could instead use the crude stick at his disposal. Danya's eyes widened in alarm. Shichiku accepted the challenge. Danya was stunned. He declared that he could not call himself a man if he retreated now. Danya tried to stop him. In her mind, she knew the truth about that stick. It possessed 1024 attack power. It was the strange rod that had slaughtered the Demon King. The terrifying possibility crossed her thoughts. What would happen if he used it against another human? She hurried after Shichiku, reminding him that Kira was her most important and cherished friend. Shichiku replied that he was fully aware of that fact and assured her that he would resolve the matter in an instant. Overcome with dread, Danya collapsed onto the floor. Kira stood unwavering, her stance resolute. As the two prepared to face each other, Danya broke into tears while watching them confront one another. At the beginning of Chapter 4, they made their way to the training grounds located behind the Adventurers Guild. Miemai was deeply concerned for Shichiku's safety, while Danya was gripped with fear for Kira. Kira remarked that she had expected Shichiku to flee with his tail between his legs, questioning whether he intended to run away again. Shichiku responded dryly that he did not possess a tail to begin with. Kira called him insolent, but conceded that she would at least acknowledge his courage. She then declared that she would become slightly more serious. Activating her granted skill, Goddess's Blessing, Valkyrie's Sweet Etude, Kira's armor began to glow and shift to white. Miemai stared in shock as the transformation took place. Jian protested that employing a blessing skill in this situation was excessive. Danya reflected that a granted skill, a goddess's blessing, was a rare and unique ability bestowed upon humans by the goddess herself. Kira's Valkyrie's Sweet Etude enhanced the body through magic, doubling the user's strength and speed. It was a straightforward yet immensely practical and powerful ability. However, even if Kira's swordsmanship had surpassed normal human limits, Shichiku himself had long since ceased to be bound by ordinary human standards. Danya cried out that no matter how many lives Kira possessed, it would not be possible. She begged her to stop. Kira muttered that Danya appeared to have grown fond of Shichiku, then assumed her stance and initiated the duel. Kira swung her sword as Shichiku stood beneath her. Her eyes widened in surprise at his speed. He closed the distance between them in an instant. If that was the case, she resolved to move even faster. A smirk crossed her face. In the next moment, she struck him across the head. To everyone's shock, Shichiku was defeated immediately, sent crashing violently into a wall. Miemai and Jian shouted his name and rushed to his side, with Danya close behind. Shichiku felt an odd sense of relief that he had at least been wearing proper attire, the adventurer's clothes set, which granted plus 15 defense. Jian exclaimed that Shichiku was on the verge of death and hurried off to retrieve potions. Miemai urged Danya to tend to him. Danya immediately cast recovery magic, and Shichiku expressed his gratitude. Danya demanded to know what he had been thinking. He replied that it had been a fortunate and efficient time save. Her confusion deepened. Shichiku elaborated that the duel had been a forced loss event, an encounter programmed to guarantee defeat regardless of the player's efforts, serving the needs of the plot. It was triggered upon greeting Kira at the Adventurers Guild. From a speedrunning perspective, choosing to admit being the otherworldly hero in the first dialogue option was the fastest route. The optimal strategy was to approach Kira within the first 4 frames and deliberately bait out a powerful attack to secure a quick knockout. Allowing the battle to drag on would waste several minutes. In his memory, the in-game version of Kira had been somewhat kinder. There were likely subtle differences between this reality and the original game, even if the overarching event remained the same. He marveled at how completely he had recovered from his injuries. Just as he was about to thank Danya again, she confessed that she had feared he might truly strike Kira with the strange rod. Shichiku was taken aback. He insisted that there was no possibility he would harm someone so important to Danya, not in front of her. That was precisely why Shichiku had stated that he was aware the two of them were best friends. Danya lowered her gaze, only to suddenly lash out in flustered denial, insisting that there was no way she could have known such a thing and angrily branding him a pervert. She scratched his cheek, and he complained that he had just taken damage. She ordered him to be quiet. Miemai stared in astonishment at the sight of the hero already standing in good health. In her mind, the scene unfolding before her seemed almost normal. Jian arrived shortly after, announcing that he had gathered all the recovery potions they had in stock. Danya informed him that they were no longer necessary. Shichiku turned toward them, a faint scratch visible on his cheek. Kira then questioned him about his deliberate defeat. Both Miemai and Jian were stunned by her assertion. Kira explained that Shichiku had completely read through her attack. Otherwise, he would not have been able to leap directly into its trajectory with such precision. A person capable of performing such a maneuver would have to be either her equal or a warrior of even greater caliber. She demanded to know his reason. Shichiku realized that this exchange did not exist in the game's original script. He hesitated, uncertain how to respond. He could hardly confess that it had been for the sake of saving time. After a pause, he answered that he had no reason to defeat her. Kira was not his enemy. Rather, she was an ally with whom he would stand together to defeat the Demon King. Kira called him a detestable man, though her tone shifted as she addressed him again, apologizing for her earlier rudeness. Shichiku replied that if they could become friends, then there was no issue. Kira declared that she would do her utmost to cooperate with him from that point forward. She added that Danya had something important to discuss and instructed Shichiku to accompany her to her room. Jian immediately expressed his desire to join them, but Kira curtly ordered both him and Miemai to return to their regular duties. Turning away, Kira remarked that the world had chosen to place its hopes upon an otherworldly hero to defeat the Demon King. The people, and even Ida herself, expected great things from Shichiku. She clenched her fist tightly and declared that she, too, had proven herself as someone of this world. She had cast aside the happiness of living as a noble's daughter and had devoted herself entirely to honing her swordsmanship since the age of 5. Every effort she had made had been for the sake of defeating the Demon King. Therefore, she asserted, she would be the one to defeat him. Later, upon hearing that the Demon King had already been defeated, Kira was struck with profound shock. Danya explained that she had decided to reveal the truth to her. Shichiku openly admitted that he had been the one to defeat the Demon King. Kira rejected the claim outright, insisting that it could not possibly be true and that such a statement was not a matter for jest, especially considering that Danya had only just summoned a hero. Danya interrupted her, clarifying that it had occurred the previous day. With a faintly smug expression, Shichiku elaborated that he had slain the Demon King merely 25 minutes after being summoned. In summary, the sequence of events was simple. Yesterday the hero had been summoned. Within that same day the Demon King had fallen. The wyvern threatening the capital had been subdued, and now, on the following day, they stood together within the Adventurers Guild. Kira stood frozen in shock and demanded to know how such a thing could have been accomplished. Shichiku answered that in his original world he had engaged in speedrunning, a competition centered on defeating the Demon King as quickly as possible. Her confusion only deepened. She pointed at him and declared to Ida that, no matter how one framed it, he sounded utterly insane. Danya urged Kira to abandon her common sense, admitting that she herself had already done so. Kira struggled to process the revelation. She insisted that Ida would never lie about the Demon King's defeat. Yet, if it were true, it would explain the strange incidents that had unfolded the previous day. When Danya asked what she meant, Kira explained that shortly after the hero summoning ritual, a roar had resounded from Arachne's castle in the north. Danya responded that she had a bad feeling about that. Shichiku remarked that the location was close enough that the sound would have reached the capital, only 10 minutes away on foot for a speedrunner. Kira continued, citing a report from the A-rank party known as the Red Lion Group. Since yesterday, Arachne's spider familiars had been sighted moving in groups, as though searching for something. Among the Demon King's Elite Four, Arachne possessed the cruelest and most shallow disposition. For the past 50 years, she had slaughtered living beings purely for amusement. Those she killed were turned into puppets through her threads and poison. Most grotesque of all, those under her control were forcibly made to awaken their granted skills. Shichiku inquired about this. Kira elaborated that while she herself had awakened the skill she desired through relentless sword training, humans could sometimes awaken a granted skill when driven into extreme circumstances. The goddess who bestowed such abilities was capricious, and there was no way to predict what power would manifest. The possibilities ranged from legendary abilities to entirely ordinary ones. Shichiku reflected that, hearing it described once more, it truly resembled a gacha system, an exercise in ruthless randomness. Kira went on to explain that Arachne took particular pleasure in torturing beautiful girls to trigger the awakening of their granted skills. Those who manifested exceptional abilities were transformed into special puppets. Shichiku began to speculate aloud that if his understanding was correct, then the elderly woman capable of distinguishing demons must have been one of Arachne's victims. He was interrupted as Danya confirmed that the old woman had indeed been among the victims 50 years ago. By some twist of fate, whether fortunate or unfortunate, Arachne had been dissatisfied with the ability she awakened, and thus the woman had not been turned into a puppet. Shichiku fell silent, clenching his fist. The entire matter was profoundly sickening. In Anverse, the moment one stepped even a single foot beyond the safety of the capital, the world revealed itself as a merciless domain ruled by demons. The people of this world had been driven into such a corner that they were forced to rely on someone summoned from another world. Kira added that the Elite Four wielded overwhelming power, capable of trampling humans like them without resistance. Yet if the Demon King had already fallen, she could not predict what Arachne might do next. If they failed to act swiftly, disaster was inevitable. Shichiku felt a faint twitch run through him. Kira emphasized that Arachne's stronghold lay in the suburbs of the capital itself. Unlike the other members of the Elite Four, Arachne was notoriously short-tempered and impulsive. As of the previous day, spies had already been dispatched to monitor her movements. However, there was a real possibility that Arachne could launch an attack before any report could be delivered, perhaps even as soon as tomorrow. Kira admitted that they could not afford to delay for even a single moment. Shichiku twitched again and pressed her for further details. Kira speculated that the royal army might be mobilized today or tomorrow, but even that would require persuading the elder sages first. Suddenly, Shichiku sprang to his feet and declared that they would defeat the enemy immediately. His face reddened slightly as he insisted that rather than waiting for the enemy to strike, they should eliminate the threat at once. Kira questioned Danya about why he was trembling. Danya recognized the expression instantly and explained that Shichiku was shivering because he wanted to speedrun. Shichiku assured them that it would be fine. He boasted that he held a world record in the true ending category as well, that he had never needed to reset for Arachne, and that his split time consistently stabilized in the low 15-minute range. Danya urged him to speak in terms she could comprehend. Shichiku clarified that if they approached the situation as a speedrun, they would not even require a full day. 15 minutes would suffice to defeat Arachne. Kira was stunned by the mention of 15 minutes. Shichiku added that given the circumstances, they would need to make certain preparations, prioritizing safety over time efficiency. However, he required Kira's cooperation. Kira dismissed the proposal outright, declaring that she would not support such an incomprehensible plan. Danya called out to her and urged her to place her trust in Shichiku. Kira was taken aback. She scratched her head in frustration before conceding that she had agreed earlier to become Shichiku's friend, and as a knight, she would not retract her word. Shichiku immediately declared that they would begin their preparations at once. He announced that he would visit the tailor and the item shop. Both girls were startled and hurried after him, telling him to slow down and explain things properly. Meanwhile, within Arachne's castle, Arachne regarded a captured victim with cold amusement, remarking that he had been bold enough to spy on her. She mused that humans lately seemed to have forgotten their proper place. A soft giggle escaped her lips. As the tortured man's body sagged lifelessly, she murmured that he was finished already, dismissing him as defective goods. Then something crossed her mind. She stated that she truly desired that particular man, the otherworldly hero. She resolved that she would most certainly make him her puppet. Back in the capital, Shichiku ran forward with visible excitement, while Danya and Kira chased after him, demanding that he explain his intentions as well. Passers-by along the streets turned their heads, staring at the unusual trio racing through the city. Kira had once been told by her grandfather, a man who had survived countless battles poised between life and death, never to aspire to become a slayer of giants. Tales of the weak overcoming the overwhelmingly strong, of a lone hero felling a towering foe, were glorified in songs and stories, yet in truth they were exceedingly rare. On the battlefield, justice belonged to those who possessed adequate strength, superior equipment, and sufficient manpower. Both quantity and quality determined victory. In most cases, the outcome of a conflict was decided long before the first blow was struck. And yet, even knowing this, there was still this man. Before Kira could pursue the thought further, an excited shout cut through the air. Shichiku triumphantly announced that it had finally appeared. The shining scale, or had dropped at last. The so-called goddess of random numbers had finally smiled upon them. Danya, exhausted, asked whether this meant they no longer had to continue breaking rocks. Kira found herself wondering why the hero was digging for jewels in the first place. The three of them were positioned on the outskirts of the capital, within the abandoned scuva mine. Shichiku declared that with the ore secured, they could safely begin racing tomorrow, and that today had merely been advanced preparation. Danya inquired about what he meant, then let out a weary sigh, lamenting how many hundreds of rocks she had already smashed. Shichiku explained that the ore used to be a guaranteed drop from the very first rock. In the past, they had been able to manipulate the randomness itself to obtain any rare item they desired. However, after the implementation of the version 1.05 update and its accompanying patch, the system had become entirely random. Kira reflected that shining scale, or was merely an aesthetically pleasing mineral. The crystals flaked off in thin, scale-like layers and could command a high price when used as decorative material. However, the substance was far too brittle to serve as weapon material. Even if it could generate money, it offered no practical benefit in combat. Her thoughts halted abruptly as her eyes widened. She motioned for Danya to stop walking. Something rustled within the nearby bushes. Without warning, a two-headed monster leapt forth. Shichiku reacted instantly, striking it with a single swing of his wooden stick. The creature staggered, swayed unsteadily, and then collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. He exhaled, remarking internally that he still disliked the high encounter rate during nighttime. Kira stared in disbelief. Shichiku had defeated an Orthrus with nothing more than a single strike from a wooden stick. She regarded the feat as extraordinary. Danya, too, reflected that it was unmistakably the result of some power beyond the ordinary. Shichiku suggested that they return to the guild quickly. Kira stopped him and instructed him to retrieve the Orthrus's magic stone. In this world, purifying magic stones at the guild was the common method of leveling up. It was basic knowledge. Danya added that even when he had defeated a giant spider and a wyvern earlier, he had not collected their magic stones either. Kira, who herself had reached level 40, acknowledged that his combat ability was undeniably high. However, challenging Arachne at level 1 had been recklessly excessive. Shichiku scratched his cheek, explaining that he believed it was fine since he was not currently attempting a speedrun. He seemed convinced that she would understand if she simply witnessed it herself. He approached the fallen monster's drop. The item pulsed faintly. As he extended his hand toward it, the dropped object suddenly rose into the air and began to glow above him. He looked up at it as it hovered, radiating light above his head before transforming into a stone. Kira observed the result carefully. There was nothing outwardly unusual about it, nothing that should warrant hesitation. Shichiku held the stone in his hand and explained that, as they could see, the cut scene was lengthy. Kira and Danya regarded him with confusion. He clarified that the acquisition cutscene for a magic stone only played once, yet it lasted 32 seconds. Even if it was skipped, the memory loading time still resulted in an unavoidable loss of approximately 10 seconds. Kira questioned what he meant by that. Danya asked whether even leveling up could be considered an obstacle in speedrunning. Shichiku answered that 10 seconds could not be dismissed in a speedrun. After all, the entire run lasted less than 30 minutes. Danya then wondered whether it would not have been better to collect the magic stone from the wyvern earlier. He admitted that it had simply become a habit for him to run without picking up any drops. Kira found herself momentarily speechless. Danya let out a weary sigh, remarking inwardly that she was beginning to lose her sense of direction. Kira, however, commented that it sounded enjoyable in its own way. Danya turned to look at her. Kira pointed out that Danya's voice had sounded lively, just like it had when they were children. Danya averted her gaze and insisted that it was merely Kira's imagination. She then walked ahead, stating that they would proceed with preparations for the subjugation of Arachne. Kira remained standing behind. That night, they returned to the capital's adventurer guild, known as Ida's Shield. Mirwan greeted Shichiku warmly and congratulated him on safely obtaining magic stones. Jian expressed amazement at what Shichiku had brought despite being a first-timer. Judging from its quality, it was clearly not something dropped by a weak monster. Jian found himself wondering what exactly the hero had defeated while still at level 1. Mirwan gestured toward a device resembling equipment from a magical academy, the Magic Stone Purifier. She instructed Shichiku to use it so he could finally leave level 1 behind. The process required inserting the magic stones and filling the apparatus with crystallization solvent. Magic stones, she explained, contained immense power but were also saturated with miasma. If a human absorbed too much of it, they would transform into a monster. Jian added that the wyvern they had encountered the other day had consumed an excessive number of magic stones and monsters, ultimately turning into a monster itself. The higher a being stood in the food chain, the more susceptible it was to such a transformation. Miemai concluded that if the miasma was removed through purification, it would become safe for humans to absorb the power and level up. After the process was completed, Shichiku advanced from level 1 to level 4. He reflected that although watching the machine operate was thrilling, the accompanying cutscene felt unbearably long. Kira then informed Shichiku that while they were there, she would appraise the skill he had been granted, the goddess's blessing. To be honest, she was uncertain about bringing him along at his current level. If there was anything reliable about him, it would be that bestowed skill. Jian inquired about where they were planning to go. Kira explained that according to legend, when a hero from another world was summoned, they would be granted a blessing skill meant to defeat the Demon King. Normally, such a skill would be examined immediately after the summoning ritual. However, in this case, the hero had run away almost at once. Shichiku muttered that it had been a misunderstanding. Kira stated that she could appraise his skill on the spot, provided he did not refuse. She belonged to the upper class in appraisal abilities. Upon hearing that they would be able to learn the hero's skill firsthand, Jian and Miemai grew visibly excited. Jian urged Kira to proceed with appraising the hero. Miemai, unable to contain her curiosity, speculated whether the granted skill might be an instant kill ability or perhaps an attack nullification power. Kira cautioned them against impatience. Shichiku, however, felt a growing sense of unease. Their expectations were dangerously high. In truth, a newly summoned hero possessed absolutely no skills. In Anverse, that had been the canonical development immediately following the summoning event. He could already imagine the reaction. The long-awaited hero, summoned after 100 years, bearing no blessing at all. It would imply that the Saintess of Salvation had merely summoned an ordinary human. Such an outcome would contradict the legends. Even Ida, who had conducted the summoning ritual, had been reprimanded for it. The intended progression was clear. Only after defeating the Elite Four would the hero awaken his formidable abilities. That was how the story was structured. Though, in practice, it was technically possible to defeat the Demon King without ever unlocking those powers. Beginning in weakness was simply the destiny of action RPG protagonists. Since he had not yet defeated the Elite Four, he possessed no hero-specific skills. From a statistical standpoint, he was nothing more than a frail level 4 ordinary man. He had no skills, and his only weapon was a wooden stick. To disappoint the people, these NPCs, with whom he had finally begun to form connections, would be cruel. Kira studied the appraisal screen before her and inquired about the nature of the skill displayed. She questioned whether the text was written in a language from another world. Shichiku was taken aback. Did he truly have a skill? That was impossible. Kira confirmed that he did indeed possess one. However, the letters composing it were unlike anything she had ever encountered in this world. She attempted to transcribe the characters, but they were complex and intricate, making it difficult to replicate them accurately. Shichiku examined the letters himself. To his eyes, they resembled garbled text, nonsensical characters. He remarked that they appeared to be letters from his own world, yet he could not read them. Danya questioned whether he should not be able to understand them if they originated from his world. Shichiku's thoughts spiraled. Was the root of the issue connected to the method by which he had defeated the Demon King? Through exploiting bugs? This particular anomaly had never once been reported within the Anverse study group. Who could have encountered this before? Why would there be an encoding error at such a crucial point? What kind of blessing had he actually been granted? Kira, after a moment of contemplation, concluded that there was no other option. She declared that she would subjugate Arachne alone the following day. Danya and Jian reacted with surprise. Kira realized she had yet to inform Jian and Miemai of her intentions. Jian brought up the matter of obtaining permission from the elder sages. Kira admitted that she had not secured any authorization and that she was acting independently. Jian warned that such actions would undoubtedly cause trouble later. Miemai added that it was dangerous to begin with. After all, Kira's opponent was Arachne, an elite-class monster. Kira explained that she could not disclose the full details, but a threat was steadily approaching the capital. If she confronted Arachne alone, she could at least drive it away. Danya stood in stunned disbelief. Kira laid out her reasoning. The otherworldly hero was only level 4. Their entire yield from the day's labor was a single shining scale, or his bestowed skill was indecipherable and therefore unusable. There was no tangible factor that suggested victory. She continued, explaining that she had followed him for half a day out of consideration for Danya. Yet she still had no understanding of what he was attempting to accomplish. Without clarity, she could not place her trust in him. Shichiku apologized for failing to provide a proper explanation. Nevertheless, he insisted that he truly did have a strategy. If they combined their respective strengths, even Arachne could be defeated with relative ease. Kira regarded him with unwavering seriousness. Mirwan and Jian were on the verge of objecting to Shichiku's proposal, but he stopped them, explaining that they would not be able to rely on the wooden stick this time. A special strategy would be necessary. In simple terms, what they lacked in levels could be compensated for with financial power. Mirwan questioned what he meant by that. Jian quickly grasped the implication and agreed. They could take on mercenary quests. Even S-rank parties occasionally stopped by. Moreover, selling the Shining Scale or would bring in a substantial sum. Among the S-rank parties was the Silver Dragon Fong, composed of Lutol, the Silver Wolf tribesman known as the Stranger, Mashimu, the One-Eyed Dragon, and Ariha, the prodigy of the Magic Academy. Kira remarked that if this had been Shichiku's plan from the beginning, he should have said so earlier. However, if she were to use either her own funds or the guild's resources, the Elder Sages would inevitably learn of it. Shichiku fell into thought for a moment before declaring that if money was the issue, he could handle it himself. He would demonstrate the power of someone from another world. A mischievous smile spread across his face as he admitted he was about to do something questionable. He instructed everyone to keep what they were about to witness a secret. Jian asked what he intended to do. Mirwan commented that it sounded entertaining. Danya, however, felt an ominous premonition that something disastrously reckless was about to unfold. Shichiku muttered that it had been a while since he had attempted this, and wondered whether he could still execute it correctly. What he required was a shining scale, or an ordinary slingshot. He began by putting away the single shining scale, or they had obtained. Then, while repeatedly equipping and unequipping the slingshot, he moved with rapid, deliberate motions. Jian, Mirwan, Kira, and Danya stared at him in shock as he trembled during the process. After a brief pause, Shichiku declared that he had succeeded. They demanded to know what he meant. He explained that he had managed to safely equip a ghost slingshot. Jian asked what exactly a ghost slingshot was supposed to be. Mirwan pointed out that Shichiku appeared to be holding nothing at all. Shichiku stated that in this state, if they withdrew the shining scale or from their inventory, it would multiply. He demonstrated as he spoke. To their astonishment, numerous shining scale ores spilled forth. Shichiku calmly announced that they now possessed 999 shining scale ores. They could exchange them at the Merchants Guild and maximize their funds. Mirwan nearly fainted on the spot, and Jian hurriedly caught her. Danya and Kira were left even more stunned. Danya demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Shichiku reassured her that it was fine, insisting that this was a safe duplication bug that did not affect the system. Danya clarified that her concern was not about system stability. Kira examined the duplicated ores closely. Each shining scale or possessed the exact same shape, yet they all appeared genuine. Danya raised another issue. If they introduced such a volume of jewels into circulation, would it not send the market into chaos? Shichiku argued that since what had increased was not currency but gemstones, it could simply be regarded as the discovery of a new mine. Danya retorted sarcastically that such a matter would never end so conveniently. Within Kira's mind, disbelief lingered. Yet reality was steadily asserting itself. She remembered that Shichiku had claimed to possess a strategy. She looked at him anew. In that moment, she truly understood that he was a man from another world. Meanwhile, Danya had already seized Shichiku by the head and begun biting him in frustration. Shichiku cried out that he was taking damage. He hastily negotiated, promising that he would make perfect preparations for the following day. He vowed that he would properly defeat Arachne. At the beginning of Chapter 6, Shichiku stood at the counter of the Capital Merchants Guild headquarters, enthusiastically presenting the full set of 999 shining scale ores for appraisal. Behind him, Danya and Kira watched with visible tension, their unease difficult to conceal. The woman overseeing the transaction, an official of the guild, was no less shaken, as were the surrounding employees who had gathered upon hearing the claim. Maintaining her composure, she activated her appraisal skill, convinced that the assertion of 999 ores had to be fraudulent. There was no plausible way such a quantity could be genuine. Yet the results left her stunned. Every single piece was authentic. Her monocle, an artifact reputed never to err in judgment, confirmed it without hesitation. Shichiko urged her to proceed quickly. The woman complied, her voice stiff as she instructed another employee in hushed tones that the exchange value amounted to 9,990,000 senator. She ordered a male employee to gather all available gold coins. The man hurriedly relayed the instruction to the rest of the staff, scrambling to retrieve their sales deposits and assemble the required amount. In Shichiku's mind, this unexpected delay registered as an irritating time loss. The transaction was unfolding in real time, and unlike in a controlled environment, the exchanges were not instantaneous. Eventually, sacks and neatly stacked piles of gold coins were presented before him. The full sum of 9,990,000 sun. Shichiku expressed his thanks, swiftly stowing the fortune into his backpack before dashing off with a casual farewell. Danya and Kira hurried after him. Left behind at the counter, the guild woman stood in disbelief, quietly questioning what had just transpired. At 3 minutes and 15 seconds past 9, Shichiku was already running through the streets. remarking that the Merchants Guild opened for business at 9 in the morning. By selling the duplicated shining scale ores, they had increased their funds to 9,990,000. Senator equipped with the peddler's bag and wallet they had prepared the previous day. He had been able to carry the entire sum without issue. Without breaking stride, he slipped through the wall of the tailor's shop once more. He muttered that thanks to the peddler's equipment, transporting the money had posed no difficulty. Back outside and continuing at full speed, he explained that what he had just utilized was something not ordinarily accessible, the so-called shining scale or cheat. Behind him, Kira wondered how he could maintain such detailed explanations while running at that pace. Danya responded that it was probably simply the way he was. Suddenly, a bird flew alongside Kira. It carried a message from Mir-1. Upon reading it, Kira's expression shifted to astonishment. She found herself questioning whether everything unfolding was part of a deliberate speedrun strategy and whether it all lay within Shichiku's calculations. She called out to him, announcing that there was good news. A particularly strong S-rank party was currently at the North Plaza. Meanwhile, at the capital's North Plaza, a crowd had gathered in excitement. Whispers and exclamations filled the air as onlookers beheld the renowned S-rank party, Silver Dragon Fong. Among the crowd, one man recognized the Silver Wolf tribesman and reacted with awe. Others struggled to believe their eyes. Someone eagerly declared a desire for an autograph. The party's arch sorcerer stepped forward and introduced herself as the most brilliant prodigy of the Magic Academy. Her name was Elaha, and she announced that autographs would be available for 100 sen each. Little declared that anyone wishing to fluff his silver fur would have to pay 1,000. Senator Elaha followed by announcing that for an S-rank adventurer, everything involved money, and even a handshake with her would cost 10,000 sun. Within the crowd, one spectator remarked to the person beside him that S-rank adventurers were far friendlier than he had imagined. The other replied that rather than adventurers, they resembled a popular dance troupe. At that moment, someone approached from behind the gathering. Another voice admonished Elaha, reminding her that they were not traveling entertainers. The speaker was Mashimu, the leader of Silver Dragon Fong. Mashimu inquired whether anyone knew the whereabouts of the otherworldly hero. He had heard that 2 days earlier, the Saintess of Salvation had successfully summoned a hero. Elaha declared that they intended to add the hero to their party. Mashimu stated that if everyone combined their strength now, the day they would defeat the Demon King would surely arrive. Amid the murmuring crowd, someone whispered whether the hero might be that peculiar man who seemed to vibrate. Another asked if that person truly was the hero. A different voice observed that even genuine S-rank adventurers were coming to accompany him. One man suggested that the hero was likely at the Adventurers Guild and urged Silver Dragon Fong to follow him there. Without warning, Mashimu's body split into two. A man near the front fell backward in terror, his face frozen in shock as he shouted that it was a monster. Mashimu's form shifted into that of a fox. Elaha realized aloud that they had been exposed as she dashed away. A shadow abruptly descended. A fox-like creature swung its fist, and the fleeing fox was sent flying by the blow. The true Elaha invoked her power, declaring that she would never utter such foolish things. Lightning descended, striking the counterfeit Elaha with precision. The real Mashimu let out a breath, admitting that he had been outmaneuvered. If such imposters continued to appear, their reputation would quickly deteriorate. They affirmed that they were the genuine Silver Dragon Fong. Elaha expressed her gratitude to someone for alerting them. An elderly woman stepped forward and returned the thanks. Mashimu commented that although he was surprised the grandmother possessed the ability to see through monsters, it was fortunate she had not caused a scene immediately. In a crowd devoid of capable fighters, a public accusation of monsters could have triggered panic. Forcing the creatures to reveal their true forms in the open might have endangered the populace even further. It was wiser to seek assistance discreetly. The elderly woman apologized, explaining that even now, the mere sight of monsters filled her with fear. Mashimu reflected that for a non-adventurer to possess such knowledge about handling monsters, circumstances must have shaped her experience. He instructed Elaha to provide the woman with some calming incense. He reassured her that everything would be fine. Together with the hero, they would defeat the Demon King. Privately, however, he acknowledged that for a novice freshly summoned, the hero would likely not even have the opportunity to make an appearance. Meanwhile, Shichiku and the two girls were sprinting along Liondal's main street in the capital. Kira questioned whether they were truly intending to run all the way to Arachne's castle, wondering if Shichiku had lost his sanity. Danya replied that she could not vouch for that. Shichiku suggested that if they were not going to continue running normally, it would actually be faster to proceed by performing continuous cartwheels. Without hesitation, he demonstrated, launching into a sequence of fluid rotations. Kira and Danya immediately told him to stop. Undeterred, Shichiku explained that when executed correctly, continuous cartwheels could allow a person to move at nearly twice the speed of regular running. The technique was widely used among speedrunners. However, because it required constant, rapid input motions, many runners developed tendinitis one after another. Even he himself had suffered from it, and had only fully recovered after 2 weeks. Given the health risks, the technique had unfortunately been banned in official speedruns. At the mention of tendinitis, Kira questioned whether he was not pushing himself far too hard. Danya wondered aloud whether people in his world did not simply play such games for enjoyment. Shichiku responded that it was precisely because they were playing for enjoyment that they took it so seriously. Kira looked at him thoughtfully. The more she came to know him, the more enigmatic he seemed. Soon after, they arrived at a long hallway, and Kira's mind drifted back 11 years into the past. In the royal castle, a young girl's voice rang out, demanding that someone be released. The child was the eldest daughter of the Lechifica dukedom, Kira herself, at 8 years old. She had been shouting for Ida not to be taken away. The maids had reacted sharply to the way she addressed Ida, so casually. Kira had insisted that it was fine, as they were friends. Ida had called out toward Kira, but a hand gesture signaled her to stop. The one who intervened was the chief priest, Melina Safari. Melina reprimanded Kira, instructing her to cease her unsightly behavior. Ida had been blessed from birth as the saintess of salvation, the savior of the world. To prepare for the day when she would summon the hero from another world, Ida could not neglect her training. There was no time for childish games. Kira had shouted that she understood that much. If it were merely ordinary training, she would not have objected. But that was not the case. They were always bullying Ida. Kira had seen it with her own eyes. Even though they attempted to conceal the marks with potions, she had witnessed Ida being whipped. Melina responded that such measures were necessary to temper Ida's spirit. For the grand summoning of the otherworldly hero, Ida would have to chant the sacred verses continuously for 10 days and 10 nights. Yet she had already collapsed on only the second day. For the summoning to succeed, the stars of both worlds would have to align, a phenomenon that occurred only once every 100 years. Failure was not an option. Against the invasion of the Demon King, only the hero from another world could serve as the light of hope for this world. Melina pressed the gravity of the matter further. Even if Kira was the esteemed daughter of the Lechifica dukedom, second only to the royal family, would it truly be acceptable for the next 100 years to fall into an era of darkness? Kira had demanded to know what this so-called light of hope truly meant. They were tormenting Ida so that she could summon a hero. They intended to rely on a stranger from another world to defeat the Demon King. But was this not their own world? Were they all fools? What, then, were their soldiers holding swords for? Should they not be the ones to hurry forth and defeat the Demon King themselves? Why were they placing such a burden upon Ida, who was only a child? To Kira, it was nothing short of shameless. A maid rebuked Kira, declaring that she understood nothing of the situation. Melina silenced the maid with a gesture before addressing Kira directly. If she intended to go so far in her defiance, then perhaps she should shoulder the responsibility herself. However, unlike Ida, Kira possessed no innate skill. For a delicate young lady such as her, Melina remarked coldly, barking and yelping were likely all she was capable of. The sharp clang of metal rang through the chamber. Kira had seized a sword from a nearby soldier. Declaring herself a daughter of the house of Lechifica, bearers of the 3 claws and proud of their valor, she proclaimed that she would become a swordsman stronger than anyone in the world. Stronger even than the hero from another world. She swore upon her name that she would defeat the Demon King. Therefore, they were to cease tormenting her friend. Ida watched in astonishment. From that day forward, Kira sought out her grandfather and implored him to take her as his disciple. She devoted herself wholly to the study of the sword, abandoning even the musical training she had once cherished. By the age of 15, there was no one within the castle capable of matching her blade. At 17, she awakened her bestowed skill. At 18, after defeating the commander of the Dragon Knights, she was granted the Lechifica armor, a suit that only the kingdom's strongest swordsman was permitted to wear. Yet none of her strength had been enough to halt Ida's training. Ida had grown into a saintess of unprecedented power, surpassing any in recorded history. Even after the Demon King had been defeated by the hero from another world, Ida's struggle had not come to an end. Kira, having finally attained formidable strength, now understood how naive and ignorant she had once been as a child. The weight of the world was not so easily borne. She could only hope that Ida would rely upon the hero. If only she herself had been able to shoulder that crushing burden in Ida's place. In the present, Shichiku continued sprinting forward. Kira called out to him, pointing out that they had already passed the North Plaza. Was he not intending to hire the S-rank party? Shichiku turned and replied that he would not. Kira stopped in shock. Shichiku explained that he could not speak openly about it the previous day in front of Jian. Danya reflected on his words and realized that he had never explicitly stated they would hire anyone. The S-rank party, Silver Dragon Fong, would not be appearing. Kira demanded to know what he intended instead, but Shichiku offered no immediate explanation and simply kept running. The time read 6 minutes and 35 seconds. 50 years ago, on the outskirts of the capital near Tadanka village, there lived a village girl named Lauren and her younger sister, Noran. One day, Noran urged Lauren to accompany her outside. Lauren, cautious as ever, first inquired whether Noran's fever had truly subsided. Noran assured her that it had completely disappeared and that she was perfectly fine. As they prepared to head out, a man seated on a carriage noticed them and asked about their destination. Lauren explained that they were going into the mountains to pick strawberries. Upon hearing this, the man's expression turned troubled. He warned them that monsters had reportedly been roaming the surrounding areas of late and reminded them that the Lord had cautioned villagers to exercise care when venturing beyond the village boundaries. He stressed that the two sisters, renowned as the prettiest in the village, should be especially careful. Noran only laughed at the familiar praise, remarking that he always said such things, while the man insisted that everyone shared the same opinion. As they passed through the village, others greeted them warmly. A young man teased them about searching for strawberries and splitting jam again. Another villager reminded Noran not to push herself too hard, mindful of her fragile health. An elderly woman urged them to return home before dark. Noran cheerfully agreed, brimming with excitement as they made their way toward the mountains. While gathering strawberries beneath the open sky, Noran's thoughts drifted to tales far grander than their quiet rural life. She asked Lauren whether she had any interest in the otherworldly hero. When Lauren questioned the sudden topic, Noran explained that she had been reading the hero's adventure logs from years past. She spoke with shining eyes about the Great Tree of Life, the Magic Crystal Cave, and the primeval forest of dragon bones. Magnificent places described in vivid detail, places the hero had personally visited. She wondered aloud what it would be like to journey alongside such a figure. Lauren responded with practical skepticism, remarking that someone with Noran's weak constitution would hardly be suited for an arduous adventure. Noran protested internally against the label of fragility and clung instead to hope. She recalled reading about given skills, blessings granted by the goddess to humans, special powers that, if nurtured through hard training, could blossom into extraordinary abilities. With such a blessing, even the life of an adventurer would become manageable. Lauren regarded this optimism as remarkable self-confidence and gently reminded her that by the time another hero appeared, the two of them would likely be old women. In the midst of their conversation, Lauren abruptly halted. A strange scent had reached her senses. It was not the smell of prescribed burning, and the timing was all wrong for such activity. A creeping dread settled over her as she looked down toward the village. Tadanka village was engulfed in flames. Gigantic spider monsters swarmed through the settlement, their massive forms silhouetted against the blaze. Homes were consumed by fire, and the air was thick with smoke and devastation. Terror seized the sisters as the horrifying truth unfolded before them. In their shock, they failed to notice the presence that had crept silently behind them. Noran's scream pierced the air when she finally saw it, a monstrous spider looming close. The creature reveled in its discovery, remarking upon finally finding suitable offerings for Arachne and admiring their pretty faces as if they were mere objects. Violence followed swiftly. Lauren's body, battered and bruised, collapsed under the assault. Arachne derided her as possessing a worthless skill, dismissing her as defective. The monstrous spider declared that defective products required proper branding. Noran, entangled helplessly within sticky webs, cried out desperately for her elder sister. The spider announced that it was now her turn. Smaller spiders skittered toward her restrained form, while the towering monster mused about whether this one would yield a worthwhile skill. Noran's screams grew frantic as pain overtook her, her pleas swallowed by the grotesque sounds of tearing flesh and snapping bones. Lauren, too weak to move, lay there listening. She could do nothing but hear the agony of her little sister, every cry etching itself into her fading consciousness. Noran's final, piercing scream echoed, and suddenly, an old woman jolted awake, shouting Noran's name. The old woman awoke in violent panic, her breath ragged and uneven as though she had run for her life. She found herself not in a burning village, but within the confines of her room in the capital. The air was still, the walls were intact. There were no monsters lurking beyond the door, no smoke choking the sky. She repeated this reality to herself as if it were a fragile spell meant to anchor her to the present. The monsters were not here. This was the capital. She was safe, yet safety offered no comfort. Her frail body trembled as the memory clung to her with merciless clarity. She began to sob, first in shuddering breaths, then in open, broken cries that filled the quiet room. Elsewhere, at precisely 9 minutes and 31 seconds into their advance, Kira and her companions reached what was known as the Spider's Highway. Once, long ago, it had been Tadanka village. Now it was a desolate ruin claimed by Arachne. Shichiku explained their chosen route with brisk efficiency. Since they possessed the strange rod, they would pass through the Spider's Highway rather than detour into the Forest of the Dead. This path was closer, and in speedrunning terms, proximity outweighed sentiment. As they surveyed the area, the devastation bore the unmistakable mark of Arachne. By royal decree, entry into Arachne's domain was forbidden to all, regardless of rank or status. The destruction, however, appeared strangely preserved. The structures were hardly weathered, as though time itself had stalled. The lingering miasma might have been responsible, The scene carried an unsettling immediacy, as if villagers had only just been there moments ago. Danya called out to Kira and gestured toward Shichiku, who had already begun moving ahead. The implication was clear, they needed to hurry. When Shichiku glanced back and confirmed they were following, relief flickered across his face. He instructed them to keep pace, warning that this stretch was the most difficult segment of the Arachne subjugation speedrun. Kira found this hard to reconcile with the fact that Arachne's castle still lay far ahead. Before further discussion could unfold, enormous spiders descended into view, their massive bodies casting shadows over the trio. These were Arachne's underlings. Kira instinctively considered activating her Valkyrie suite, but Shichiku immediately forbade it. He insisted that her given skill must be preserved for the confrontation with Arachne herself. Kira was stunned by his confidence. Even he would be overwhelmed by such numbers. Shichiku, however, dismissed the threat with calculated detachment. If he fought normally using his wooden stick, victory would be simple, but combat consumed precious time. Instead, they would cut through the area without engaging. They would dash past the enemy. He instructed them to mirror his movements exactly. Kira stood momentarily dazed as Danya urged her forward. Shichiku explained the mechanics with the precision of someone dissecting a game system. The spiders' movement patterns were fixed. If caught, each entanglement would cost them 10 seconds or more. The key was to alter direction sharply, left, then right, at roughly a 60-degree angle the instant the spiders reacted. At level 1, stamina management would normally pose a serious constraint, but under today's conditions, that limitation was negligible. Even so, this remained a difficult segment, demanding swift judgment and careful footwork. Behind them, Danya noticed the pursuing enemies closing in. Shichiku announced that the moment had come. They would employ coin throwing. By dealing damage through the act of tossing gold coins, they could guarantee an escape from pursuing monsters. The cost was literal. Each coin thrown reduced their own wealth by that amount. By scattering money randomly behind them, the giant spiders would abandon the chase. If one possessed sufficient funds, the tactic could be used liberally, as Shichiku demonstrated. As for why monsters were drawn to gold coins, he admitted he had no genuine understanding. The plan worked. The spiders ceased their pursuit, distracted by the scattered wealth. The trio cleared the spiders' highway safely. Shichiku assessed their time with satisfaction, declaring it a good pace. He even praised Kira and Danya for possessing speedrunning talent. Danya questioned whether the gold coins had truly been meant for this purpose and whether such a large sum had been necessary. Kira, meanwhile, found no joy in being commended for the ability to run quickly. In her mind, the contradiction festered. The hero possessed overwhelming power capable of subduing enemies outright, yet he chose to scatter money simply to avoid battle. More unsettling still was his utter lack of visible sorrow at the horrific state of the ruined village. To him, this entire operation appeared to be nothing more than a game. The previous day, within the Demon King's throne room, a summons had echoed through the abyss. A gathering was called for the beloved children of wickedness. The one who dispensed white threads, the spider. The duke drenched in red blood. The hungering quagmire. They were commanded to hasten. Before them lay the corpse of their father, the king of despair, the embodiment of apocalypse, the ruler who had reigned until his end. In his presence, or rather before his remains, they stood in grim assembly. They would offer him a sacrifice. At the center of this gathering stood Morphomet, daughter of the Demon King. Her command was clear and unwavering. She desired the head of the troublesome otherworldly hero. One day earlier, while Shichiku's party busied themselves mining shining scales, a very different assembly was taking place within the dominion of demons. For figures gathered around the Demon King's round table, a place reserved only for the highest echelon of his forces. Among them stood Morphomet, counted as one of the elite four who served directly beneath the Demon King. The chamber stirred as a gate of purgatory opened, an advanced transportation magic that linked each member's stronghold directly to the round table. Through that distortion in space arrived the Queen of Spiders, Arachne. Her entrance was met not with reverence, but with impatience. The hungering quagmire, Raspi, immediately remarked upon her tardiness, insinuating that perhaps she had forgotten how to operate transportation magic at all. He went further, belittling her as an insect and deriding insects as creatures cursed with worthless memories. Another presence observed this exchange with measured composure, the blood-soaked Duke, Brahms. He commented dryly that such a provocative greeting was rather mischievous, adding that the hot-blooded temperament of youth was hardly a virtue. Raspi turned his mockery toward Brahms as well, accusing the elder demon of flaunting his age in an irritating display of superiority. He taunted further, questioning whether Brahms regarded the aged Spider Queen as a child too. Arachne's composure fractured at the insult. She demanded to know what Raspi had just implied and dismissed him as an insolent brat. Raspi only laughed, advising her not to overexert herself and remarking cruelly that the puppet body she inhabited was nearing its expiration date. He pointed out her wrinkles with theatrical disdain. Brahms listened to the exchange without intervening. Arachne retaliated by commanding Raspi to be silent and branding him a low-class demon. Raspi bristled at the slight. The air between them thickened as they locked eyes in mutual hostility, their animosity threatening to escalate. It was Morphomet who silenced them. Her authority cut through the discord with chilling clarity. She stated that they all surely understood the reason for which he had summoned them. Their great father of darkness, the Demon King Apocalypse, their dark son, was gone. They had lost him. The declaration shifted the atmosphere of the chamber. Morphomet began to cry, her grief erupting in unrestrained wails as she lamented her father's death. The Demon King, who had never fallen to any foe, had been taken from them. She mourned not merely a ruler but a beloved parent. In quieter recollection, she described how he had once allowed her to listen to the dying screams of humans as a pastime, indulging her whims with indulgent affection. To her, he had been a kind father. Through tears, she demanded to know whether the others felt sorrow as she did. Raspis' expression betrayed confusion rather than grief. Morphomet questioned their silence, accusing them of lacking hearts. She ordered them to cry. Obedience followed in hollow imitation. Raspi produced an exaggerated, insincere sobbing performance, and Arachne followed suit, with similarly artificial lamentation. Then Morphomet revealed the cause of their loss. The previous day, humans had summoned a hero from another world, and that very individual had slain her father. Raspis' confusion deepened into disbelief. The notion that a hero summoned only a day prior could defeat the Demon King within the same span of time struck him as absurd. The speed of such an outcome defied all reason. He laughed openly at the impossibility, concluding that Morphomet must have lost her sanity to suggest something so implausible. Morphomet's demeanor shifted instantly. She seized Raspi by the mouth, her grip silencing his laughter. She demanded to know whether he was mocking her, finding his insolence particularly galling given his status as an upstart slime. She acknowledged that even she had struggled to believe what she had witnessed. It was beyond reason that her father could have fallen so swiftly. Yet she had seen it with her own eyes. Though it had not been her intention, she declared that they would all bear witness to their father's demise. They would see the truth in the form of their detestable enemy. Morphomet moved to stand beside a large mirror known as the Eye of the Dead, an artifact capable of projecting the final moments experienced by the deceased. The four elite demons gathered before it in tense anticipation. The vision unfolded. What appeared before them was not a majestic warrior clad in radiant armor, but a man wearing nothing but his undergarments. Arachne reacted with visible shock. Brahms, however, recognized the figure as the otherworldly hero. Raspi, baffled by the absurdity of the sight, questioned why the supposed slayer of their demon king stood nearly naked in the final memory of Apocalypse. As the vision within the Eye of the Dead continued to unfold, Raspis' attention briefly shifted when Danya appeared within the projection. He immediately fixated on her presence, idly remarking on her feline features and declaring her cute, expressing a casual desire to keep her as though she were a collectible curiosity. The scene then returned its focus to the battlefield. The otherworldly hero stood against the Demon King Apocalypse. The four elite demons watched intently as the confrontation played out. The hero evaded every single attack launched at him, moving with unnatural precision. Not a strike landed, not a spell connected. Each assault from the Demon King passed harmlessly by. Then the counterattack came. The hero struck the Demon King. Brahms stiffened in disbelief as the exchange concluded with astonishing brevity. The Demon King fell after merely 3 blows. The blood-soaked Duke struggled to process what he had witnessed, wondering whether their sovereign had been afflicted by some form of debilitating debuff that had weakened him prior to the clash. Raspis' confusion turned into alarm. Something was fundamentally wrong. Their collective shock deepened when they realized the hero had not wielded the legendary Holy Sword at all. Instead, he had been beating the Demon King with nothing more than a wooden stick. Brahms questioned the very nature of reality before him, unable to reconcile the absurdity of the sight. He wondered whether wooden sticks in the modern era had somehow become weapons of such catastrophic power. Raspi dismissed the notion outright, condemning it as blatant cheating. The vision reached its conclusion. The Demon King was slain. Arachne stared at the fading image, and a grin slowly crept across her face. Morphomet declared that what they had witnessed was the entirety of the event. Within mere minutes, her father had been killed by the summoned hero, and not only killed but humiliated, defeated in a manner so childish it defied dignity. To her, this was an unforgivable disgrace. The otherworldly hero who had both slain and shamed the Demon King deserved torment beyond imagination. She swore that she would murder him in the most horrifying way possible. At that moment, attention turned toward Arachne. Morphomet sensed that the Spider Queen harbored thoughts she had not voiced. If Arachne possessed information regarding the hero, she was commanded to reveal it. Arachne met Morphomet's gaze. In her mind, she regarded the girl as nothing more than a child who wielded authority solely by virtue of being the Demon King's daughter. Yet in light of the current circumstances, Arachne merely smiled and denied having anything to add. Morphomet studied her carefully, but the matter went no further. Later, Within the depths of Arachne's castle, the Spider Queen hurried through her domain with restless excitement. Her thoughts churned with ambition. She desired the otherworldly hero's power above all else. With such strength in her grasp, even Morphomet could be eliminated, that arrogant beneficiary of nepotism. Afterward would come Raspy, the insolent slime, and then Brams, whose very presence irritated her. Her scheme crystallized with clarity. She would transform the hero into her puppet. The skill that had reduced the Demon King to a corpse with nothing more than a wooden stick was no ordinary ability. It was power on the level of a war god, unstoppable, absolute. Though she found Min distasteful, she could not deny that the hero's skill belonged to the realm of legend. It was precisely because of that she coveted him. She possessed the means to secure victory. Drawing upon a power she had once extracted from a young girl, Arachne invoked her legendary ability, Karna Kavacha. This skill granted her an invincible defense. Whether struck by an adamantine blade or engulfed by a grand magician's ultimate spell, she would not suffer so much as a scratch. It was absolute protection. No matter how overwhelming the hero's wooden stick might be, it remained categorized as a physical attack. Even if it had felled the Demon King and others, it would not penetrate her shield. And if his attacks proved ineffective, then he would be nothing more than flesh and blood, a human to be mocked and broken at her leisure. Karna Kavacha was the strongest shield. True, it was not a spear capable of slaying a Demon King. Yet against the hero's ultimate spear, it functioned as the perfect nullifier, rendering his greatest strength meaningless. Once she seized the hero's power and bound him as her puppet, she would become the true ruler of this world, not merely in title, but in undeniable reality. In this world, might dictated justice. Strength alone legitimized authority. Until now, she had endured the role of subordinate, obeying the Demon King's commands. That era would end. No one would ever order her again. Any who dared to rebel would be slaughtered. She envisioned a perfect utopia of absolute obedience, forged through overwhelming power. She would ascend as the new Demon King. To her, this was freedom. This was happiness. The thought thrilled her. Impatient, she wondered what her underlings were doing. She urged them mentally to hurry, to bring the hero before her as swiftly as possible. Then, abruptly, reality intruded. At 12 minutes and 35 seconds into the current timeline, the hero, accompanied by Danya and Kira, stood before Arachne herself. The ground trembled with ominous rumbling. And yet, despite the tension thick in the air, the hero calmly offered Arachne a greeting. At 12 minutes and 35 seconds, the hero, Danya, and Kira finally stood face to face with Arachne. The Spider Queen had not anticipated their arrival so soon. A flicker of surprise crossed her expression as the hero calmly offered her a greeting, as though they had met under far less hostile circumstances. Kira immediately recognized the presence before them, the Queen of Spiders, one of the Demon King's elite four. Arachne, the architect of the devastation that had reduced a village to ash and ruin. The memory of that sight hardened Kira's resolve. They would defeat her. They had to. Just before entering this confrontation, Shichiku had outlined the mechanics of the battle with meticulous precision. Arachne would continuously release an endless stream of small spiders to overwhelm them. While doing so, she would render herself temporarily defenseless, but the sheer volume of lesser monsters would create relentless pressure. Shichiku had assigned Kira the role of clearing these small spiders using wide-area attacks. Her task was defensive control, preventing the battlefield from being overrun. Kira understood that her focus would be on containment rather than direct offense. Yet doubts surfaced. She questioned whether they truly had a chance of victory. Danya pointed out that they had already defeated the Demon King, who was supposedly stronger than Arachne. However, Shichiku immediately interrupted that assumption. He analyzed the situation clinically. The Wyvern's condition in the capital, the Orthrus encounter on the outskirts. These anomalies suggested that something about the difficulty had shifted. Ordinarily, only trivial enemies would appear in those regions. Furthermore, when he had subjugated the Demon King, the difficulty had seemed unusually low, and he had defeated the final boss without sustaining any damage. Given that outcome, it was possible that the system had recalibrated the difficulty to a far harsher setting. Danya pressed for clarification. Shichiku summarized the implication bluntly. The current Arachne was stronger than the Demon King he had previously defeated. The statement unsettled both women. Kira faltered, and Danya demanded to know why he was making them anxious at such a critical moment. Shichiku insisted that the speedrun route had already been constructed with this possibility in mind. They simply needed to trust him. The plan accounted for the fact that Arachne could not be eliminated in a single strike. Her health pool was significantly high, requiring sustained offense over multiple exchanges. To ensure victory, eliminating the swarming lesser spiders was a non-negotiable prerequisite. That necessity was precisely why he had brought Kira. At 12 minutes and 48 seconds, Arachne laughed. She had not expected the otherworldly hero to present himself so boldly within her domain. She had desired to meet him, and now that he stood before her, she had no intention of allowing him to escape. Her gaze shifted toward Kira and Danya. whom she regarded as new playthings brought along for her amusement. The hero, she mused, was almost considerate for delivering them to her. A wicked grin spread across her face as she declared her intention to turn them all into puppets. In the next instant, Kira perceived her body being pierced through, holes torn open by invisible force. Shock surged through her. She trembled violently and collapsed onto the ground. Yet there was no pain, no blood, no wound. Her body remained physically unharmed. The gruesome image had been nothing more than the manifestation of Arachne's overwhelming bloodlust, an intimidation technique that assaulted the mind rather than the flesh. Though intact, Kira found herself unable to move. Her limbs refused to respond. Danya called out to her in alarm. Shichiku assessed the situation immediately. Kira had been stunned. Arachne had opened the battle with an intimidation attack that carried only a 5% activation chance. The unfortunate trigger meant the odds had not favored them. It was simply bad randomness. Arachne mocked the fallen knight, dismissing her as little more than ornamental decoration. Shichiku reacted without hesitation, tossing Danya a mana recovery salve, the purple potion. He announced that it was time to implement backup strategies. Until Kira recovered from the stun, Danya would have to handle the trash mobs alone. Danya was visibly shaken by the responsibility. Shichiku reassured her with numbers rather than comfort. With the purple potion's restoration, he had calculated that she would possess barely enough mana to sustain the necessary output. The margin was narrow, but sufficient. Danya steadied herself. She understood. Arachne dismissed their movements as futile. Whatever they intended, she believed it amounted to pointless resistance. The swarm advanced. The smaller spiders surged forward in writhing masses. Danya activated her skill, Nakomata Fire. The technique consumed mana to generate fireballs, serving as her primary area of effect magical attack. Flames gathered at her command and launched outward in explosive bursts. She hurled fireball after fireball into the advancing swarm, incinerating clusters of spiders in blazing arcs. The battlefield ignited with flashes of orange and red as the creatures burned. Behind her, Kira remained on the ground, immobilized, while Danya stood as the sole barrier between the endless tide and their party's survival. Kira lay rigid on the ground, her body refusing to obey her will. Before her eyes, Ida, locked in combat with Arachne, moved against an enemy that stood directly within Kira's reach. The proximity tormented her. Her swords were still in her hands. The opponent was right there. She questioned herself relentlessly. What was she holding those blades for if she could not even rise and fight? She urged herself to move, to stand, to cut down the enemy before them. But the fear would not loosen its grip. She muttered internally that it was impossible. It was terrifying. Just when she had begun to believe she could finally be of use to Ida, she had been rendered helpless. What meaning did her title as the strongest swordsman carry if she could not act at the crucial moment? Had everything she had accomplished until now amounted to nothing? Was it all about to end here? A voice interrupted the spiral of her thoughts. Shichiku observed calmly that her stun had not yet worn off. He instructed her not to avert her gaze. Instead, she was to watch carefully. What was about to unfold, he stated, was the finale of the Arachne subjugation speedrun. Kira struggled to comprehend. Across the battlefield, Arachne declared that it was already too late for the hero. She had activated Karna Kavacha. Shichiku provided the necessary explanation. Karna Kavacha was Arachne's legendary defensive skill, a legend-class ability that granted absolute invincibility. Danya reacted in shock at the revelation. Arachne boasted with evident pride. Her Karna Kavacha nullified every form of attack, physical, magical, even spiritual. It was eternal invulnerability, the strongest shield. The hero's fate, she proclaimed, was to perish here without ever landing a meaningful blow. Then something unexpected struck her. A coin hit Arachne squarely on the head. Her expression twisted in surprise. The impact caused her skin to peel slightly where it connected. Danya stared in disbelief. An attack had worked. Against Karna Kavacha, coins clattered to the ground. Without hesitation, Shichiku scooped up another handful of gold and hurled them. The metallic projectiles struck Arachne again. She struggled to process what the hero was throwing at her. Another handful followed, pelting her in rapid succession. Shichiku explained the crux of the strategy as he acted. The central problem in fighting Arachne lay in her invincible defense skill. Because no standard attack, whether physical, magical, or spiritual, could bypass Karna Kavacha, even the strange rod was useless against her. Danya questioned the tactic. Coin throwing, she recalled, was a mechanic used to guarantee escape from enemies. It was not classified as an attack. Shichiku confirmed that very distinction was the key. Within Anver's game system, coin throwing was not categorized as an attack. Therefore, it was not subject to the nullification properties of Karna Kavacha. The system defined it as a special action, one that dealt damage by throwing money and simultaneously ensured a successful escape from battle. However, because Arachne was a boss-class enemy, escape was disabled. The system would not allow them to flee from a boss encounter. That restriction created an exploitable loophole. Since escape was impossible in this context, The damage-dealing component of coin throwing remained active without triggering its withdrawal effect. They could throw coins repeatedly, as many times as they wished, converting what was meant to be a retreat mechanic into a sustained offensive measure. In essence, they were weaponizing a system oversight, using coin throwing as an artificial form of attack. If they attempted to fight Arachne through conventional means, they would be annihilated. Ordinarily, overcoming Karna Kavacha would require acquiring a legend-class item capable of nullifying her defense, a process that would consume an unacceptable amount of time in a speedrun context. This was precisely where coin throwing demonstrated its brilliance. The damage inflicted scaled directly with the amount of money thrown. Maximum coin expenditure equated to maximum damage output. According to Shichiku's calculations, defeating Arachne would require approximately 30 full-force throws. Another handful of coins struck her. Time check, 13 minutes and 56 seconds. Under the relentless barrage of gold, Arachne found herself unable to advance, unable even to properly retaliate. Each handful of coins struck with unceasing rhythm, staggering her in place. The continuous impacts denied her the space to move, much less to counterattack. In mounting frustration, she pointed toward her swarm and ordered the smaller spiders to silence the irritating human pelting her with money. Yet before they could reach him, they were engulfed in flames. Danya stood firm, unleashing fire to intercept the advancing horde, declaring through action that she would not allow the spiders to interfere. Arachne's fury escalated. She spat curses at the humans, condemning them as fragile defects, beings unworthy of defiance. Rage consumed her composure as she swore she would slaughter them all. Another handful of coins struck her face mid-curse. The impacts continued without pause. The hero did not hesitate, did not falter. He simply kept throwing. Blow after blow landed. Finally, with a heavy thud, Arachne collapsed. Shichiku muttered that the exchange had gone well. There was a specific threshold he had aimed for. When Arachne's health reached half, a precisely timed knockdown could cancel her second phase transformation. That second phase would have unleashed her threads in chaotic barges across the battlefield, drastically complicating the encounter. More critically for his purposes, it would have triggered a 60-second transformation cutscene, an unacceptable loss of time in a speedrun. Skipping it entirely was the optimal outcome. On the ground, Arachne realized with mounting horror that her health had dropped too low to initiate the transformation at all. Another handful of coins struck her before she could recover. Kira watched in stunned disbelief. Before her stood a man who had done nothing but throw coins, and a legendary demon struggling helplessly under that absurd assault. She questioned whether this was truly how the otherworldly hero fought Arachne. Arachne, humiliated and battered, demanded that they stop pelting her with coins, complaining that the tactic was irritating beyond measure. To Kira's eyes, the once terrifying Spider Queen now resembled a clown, reduced to flustered indignation under the most mundane of projectiles. And Shichiku showed no trace of fear. Fear, tragedy, spectacle, none of it touched him. He ignored the theatrics, the threats, the chaos. His mind held only one objective: defeat the enemy as quickly as possible. Kira's eyes widened as realization dawned. This was not merely the otherworldly hero. This was speedrunning. The sheer absurdity of it left her muttering that it was ridiculous, truly ridiculous. Meanwhile, Danya continued holding back the remaining spiders. Flames erupted again and again, until they did not. Her fire sputtered and died. Her mana reserves had been exhausted. She had already consumed the purple potion. By her estimation, only a few more waves remained. If she still possessed Ida's body, she would not have run dry so easily. Shichiku noticed immediately. Alarm flickered across his face as a giant spider broke through and lunged toward Danya. Danya clenched her teeth, bracing herself. A blade flashed. A sword was drawn in a single fluid motion. Kira rose, activating Valkyrie's sweep and waltz. The stun had faded. She called out for Shichiku to leave the rest to her. Shichiku glanced back and calculated swiftly. They needed only 4 more throws. On the ground, Arachne's bravado disintegrated. Understanding her imminent defeat, she pleaded for mercy. She offered fealty. She promised her puppets, her territory, her castle, her servants, everything. She would obey whatever command the hero gave. She did not wish to die in such a pathetic fashion. She begged for her life. Shichiku paused at her plea. For a fleeting instant, memories surfaced. The ruined village, the old woman, the sister whose fate had been sealed long ago. Then his expression hardened. Time, he stated, was more important than life. He hurled another handful of coins. Arachne's terror peaked as the gold struck. A final, resounding impact echoed through the chamber. Silence followed. Shichiku announced that the timer had stopped. 15 minutes and 38 seconds. At the beginning of Chapter 10, Arachne cried out in defiance, insisting she had done nothing wrong even as death overtook her and Noran's soul was finally released. With her fall, the subjugation of Arachne came to an end. Shichiku halted where he stood, his body giving way as exhaustion overtook him. Danya questioned whether it was truly finished. The The time recorded was 15 minutes and 38 seconds. Shichiku declared that this marked the conclusion of the Arachne subjugation speedrun and immediately shifted into post-run analysis. They had exceeded the 15-minute target by 38 seconds. Although there had been an unthinkable 3-minute loss due to the merchant skill, he reasoned that their subsequent performance had compensated for it through solid play. Hira urged him to stop rambling, but Shichiku explained that he reviewed every speedrun afterward in order to improve for the next attempt. Hira was stunned by the implication that there would even be a next time. Without warning, the castle began to tremble and collapse around them. Shichiku recalled that a cut scene was meant to occur at that point. Danya instructed everyone to gather close to her. She possessed the Matatabi Travel, a special classic magic tool loaned to her by the royal family, capable of instantly transporting its user to any previously visited location. She invoked capital Falshla, and in an instant they vanished. Behind them, the castle crumbled into ruin as the spiders within it gradually faded from existence. Sometime later, the group appeared just outside the Adventurers Guild, Ida's Shield, in the capital of Falshla. Jian noticed them immediately and acknowledged their arrival with visible concern. Shichiku fixed his gaze on him. Jian remarked that he had somehow managed to make it and proceeded to hand over the jailbreak thread, a rare consumable item priced at 8,000 sun that allowed escape from various dungeons and boss encounters. Shichiku failed to grasp the situation, prompting Jian to question the blank expression on his face and to ask whether they were not about to subjugate Arachne. Shichiku was taken aback. Hira affirmed that they were. Danya realized that it was not even 9:30 yet, given that the entire ordeal had lasted only 15 minutes. Jian explained that with the jailbreak thread in hand, the hero would at least be able to return home alive. Even if Shichiku was the hero, Jian admitted he would feel terrible if a guild junior were to die under his watch. Shichiku called out to him and began to speak, but Jian's voice rang out sharply upon hearing the revelation that Arachne had already been defeated. Elsewhere, at the Demon King's round table, Bram remarked that Arachne had been present only the day before. Raspi suggested reviewing the scene again, scoffing at the cause of death, gold coins, and finding it so absurd that he could laugh endlessly. He considered it a fitting outcome for the spider hag. Morphomet observed that Arachne's Karna Kavacha had merely been something she borrowed, and that she had fallen without ever discovering its weakness. It was, in his view, an appropriate end for such a foolish insect. Raspi agreed, dismissing Arachne as trash and the worst among the Elite Four. Bram countered that both Raspi and Arachne were equally trash, genuine demons in every sense. In his thoughts, he acknowledged that the mockery exchanged among them was not arrogance, but a privilege afforded only to the strong. Bram reflected further on the events. On the very first day he was summoned, the hero had defeated the Demon King. By the third day, he had defeated Arachne as well. It was difficult to believe, yet those were the undeniable facts. Bram found himself questioning how the hero had uncovered Arachne's weakness, a vulnerability that had eluded even him during their first encounter. He speculated whether the hero possessed some legendary class future sight or an appraisal skill granted by the goddess. Yet even such extraordinary abilities failed to fully account for what had transpired. The hero's movements were unervingly refined, as though he had known Arachne's weakness from the very beginning and had fought the same battle repeatedly, honing his actions through countless repetitions. Such a scenario should have been impossible. Defeating the Demon King could not be achieved by such means alone. It was inconceivable that a being humanity had battled with all its accumulated wisdom for thousands of years could be felled by a mere strike from a wooden stick, especially when the Demon King possessed no discernible weaknesses. Bram pondered further. Was Arachne's weakness truly gold coins? How was that any different from throwing stones? From a standpoint of durability, human gold coins should not possess such destructive force, even if enchanted. And if such a vulnerability were real, why had Arachne herself been unaware of it? Though she was hardly brilliant, was she truly foolish enough to stake everything on a flawed trump card without question? He halted his line of reasoning. There was insufficient information to draw firm conclusions, and clinging to a hastily formed hypothesis based on speculation would only invite greater danger. He decided they would suspend further discussion for the time being. Regardless of the specifics, the hero represented an unprecedented threat. The millennia-long dominion of the demons now stood on the brink of collapse. The hero would have to be eliminated or persuaded by some means. The very thought filled Bram with growing resentment, and he resolved that he would not personally confront that hero. He wondered whether Morphomet might abandon any plans of revenge, though he deemed that unlikely. Nearby, Reizu grinned and muttered with amusement that it was not merely the wooden stick at play. The hero himself was profoundly intriguing. Meanwhile, the hero awoke from his slumber. Shichiku had slept for a considerable time. Upon checking the time, he noticed noise outside his door, where Kira could also hear the commotion. Danya announced that they were entering. When the door opened, they were met with the sight of a completely naked Shichiku. Kira let out a shriek, and Danya questioned why he was unclothed. Shichiku, still disoriented, asked if they had seen his smartphone. He searched for his clothes, but found none in sight, worrying that if the situation persisted, it would interfere with his work. Danya observed that he appeared to be only half awake, and Kira urged him to put something on immediately. Later, the three of them gathered at the table. Shichiku offered an apology for having exposed himself so indecently. Kira, still flushed with embarrassment, affirmed her disapproval, while Danya sought confirmation that he was now fully awake. Shichiku affirmed that he was fully awake. Inwardly, he retraced the sequence of events that had led him there. He had been summoned to the world of another verse, where he had proceeded, as usual, to speedrun the Demon King on the very first day. 2 days later, he had subjugated one of the Elite Four, Arachne. Now it was the 4th day since his summoning. A faint unease surfaced as he wondered whether everything related to his work was still in order. He mentioned that something had been on his mind even before this, and questioned why Kira was dressed the way she was. Internally, he immediately recognized the outfit. It was from Anverse's first DLC, the Valkyrie's holiday costume. He noted to himself that it was exceptionally well designed. Kira averted her gaze. She explained that Shichiku had been fighting continuously for the past 3 days, and she believed fatigue must have accumulated. For that reason, she wanted him to set aside combat, at least for the day, and allow both his mind and body to rest. It was an act of consideration on her part. Shichiku, however, felt somewhat uneasy at the thought of being visited by a woman clad in armor. As he prepared to reply, Kira pressed him for a response. She asked whether it seemed strange to him, given that she was dressed differently from usual. Shichiku was perplexed. In his mind, he compared her current attire to her usual bikini armor and concluded that what she was wearing now was not strange at all. In fact, he thought it suited her very well. Kira flushed and scoffed lightly, leaving Shichiku further confused. Danya suggested they take a walk around town, noting that the weather was pleasant. Kira agreed. Shichiku added that there was somewhere he wished to go. The three of them stepped outside. As they walked, Kira found herself stealing glances at Shichiku. She realized that he had a rather attractive face. The thought caused her cheeks to warm, and she quickly chastised herself, reminding herself that they were in the midst of a national crisis. Even Ida was prepared to endanger herself for the sake of the kingdom. Yet just earlier, Ida had reacted with remarkable composure upon seeing Shichiku naked. Kira could not help but wonder whether the two of them were already in that sort of relationship. Danya noticed Kira's visibly conflicted expression and remarked that she seemed unusually interesting that day. Shichiku responded internally that, at the very least, this did not resemble any bug he was familiar with. In his mind, he identified her as Kira Re Lachifica, 19 years old, currently aggravated. Suddenly, a child pointed at Shichiku and declared him to be the vibrating hero. The child's mother hastily tried to silence him, but the boy insisted that it was she who had told him that the otherworldly hero was a vibrating man. The mother shushed him more urgently. Their exchange drew the attention of those nearby, who began asking whether Shichiku truly was the otherworld hero. Another man, having overheard, rushed forward along with others. The crowd quickly gathered around Shichiku. One man inquired whether the hero had already finished subjugating Arachne, mentioning that he had heard the story from Jian. He added that this meant Shichiku was not merely some suspicious individual after all. Kira muttered a curse directed at Jian under her breath. Danya pointed out that Arachne's castle stood only a short distance from the capital, making it impossible to conceal what had happened in any case. Shichiku reflected that he was attracting an overwhelming amount of attention. The atmosphere reminded him of waiting rooms at speedrun events. A child approached him, calling him Mr. Hero, and eagerly asked him to perform the vibrating trick again. The child insisted that the hero had done it before for the wyvern. The young girl stepped forward and asked the hero to perform the same vibrating display for them as well. Shichiku reflected that such an event had never occurred in Anverse. He cast a glance toward Danya, who responded with a subtle nod. Accepting the cue, Shichiku executed the vibrating motion once more, the intensity of it startling even Kira. Later, within the capital's newly established refugee quarter, Shichiku stood by a modest home and politely asked through the window if he might enter. The elderly woman inside was taken aback to see that the visitor outside was none other than the hero. Shichiku greeted her with a gentle smile. She offered him a seat, apologizing for not having proper chairs for guests. He insisted that since they had arrived unannounced, she should remain seated instead. Opening his palm, Shichiku revealed a flower-shaped item resting upon it. It was a drop obtained from Arachne, and he expressed his belief that the old woman might recognize it. She immediately identified it as something that had belonged to Noran. Danya quietly wondered whether the woman had been related to the girl who had been manipulated by Arachne. The elderly woman confessed that she still dreamed of that terrible day, when her sister had been killed before her eyes while she herself had been powerless, trapped, and unable to intervene. Though the memory continued to haunt her, she acknowledged that it was finally over. Tears streamed down her face as she expressed her certainty that the nightmares would no longer return. She conveyed her heartfelt gratitude to the otherworldly hero. For a fleeting moment, Shichiku caught a vision of the woman as she had been in her youth, and the sight caused him to blush faintly. The old woman smiled warmly before bidding them farewell as they departed. As they walked away, Kira remarked that Shichiku seemed capable of such sentiments after all. She had previously believed him to be a man concerned with nothing but speedrunning, yet her impression of him had begun to shift. Shichiku turned toward her and explained that what they had just completed was a sub-quest known as the butterfly in the cobweb. Both Kira and Danya appeared puzzled. He elaborated that it was a lore-related sub-quest connected to the main storyline, though unnecessary for achieving the true ending. The reward amounted to only a single potion, and objectively, it was not a quest worth pursuing. Nevertheless, he had wanted to return the item because it was a keepsake belonging to the old woman's dearly departed sister. Kira and Danya fell silent at his explanation. When he questioned why they had nothing to say, they responded by telling him not to suddenly say something so reasonable without warning. Shichiku stared back at them in profound confusion. Later, at the adventurers' guild known as Ida's Shield, Mirwan confronted Shichiku and asked what he had been intending to do. His only response was a puzzled reaction. Mirwan rebuked him for answering so vaguely and questioned why he had not submitted a mercenary request for an S-rank party. She had intended to assist in the subjugation of Arachne by introducing him to the S-rank Silver Dragon Fong party. According to her, that party had arrived upon hearing of the mission, only to discover that Shichiku had already departed without meeting them. They had not anticipated being left out and were reportedly disheartened by the realization that they had not been relied upon. The situation had proven overwhelming. Shichiku offered an apology, recalling inwardly how lengthy and cumbersome the tutorial for the mercenary system had been. Mirwan, sniffling slightly, expressed her relief that Shichiku, Kira, and Danya had all returned safely. Shichiku reacted with surprise. Mirwan then apologized to Kira for troubling her on her day off, but explained that regarding the subjugation of Arachne, a questionnaire had arrived from the capital that required an urgent response. After reading the contents of the envelope, Kira observed that the response had arrived with surprising speed, particularly considering that it came from the council of elderly sages who were notorious for their inability to make swift decisions. She stated that she would prepare a written report for the high officials herself. Although the day had been short, she considered it enjoyable. She also resolved to conceal Shichiku's speedrunning ability, recognizing that it would create unnecessary complications if the old sages were made aware of such a power. Danya responded cheerfully, adding her habitual feline inflection. The familiar sound of that word caused Shichiku to blush once more. Kira instructed the two of them to make the most of their day off before departing. With Kira gone, Shichiku and Danya stepped outside together. Danya remarked that, unexpectedly, there was no crowd gathered around them this time, which struck her as odd. Shichiku agreed. It occurred to him that it was now just the two of them. Since meeting Kira, this was the first time he and Danya had found themselves alone like this. After some contemplation, Shichiku called out to her. He admitted that he should have brought up the matter earlier, but during the confrontation with Arachne, she had nearly come to harm, and he wanted to apologize for exposing her to such danger. Danya looked surprised. Shichiku explained that his backup strategy had been calculated too tightly, leaving almost no margin for error and nearly resulting in her injury. Even though he knew that NPC damage in this world could be instantly remedied with potions, the thought still weighed on him. Danya responded that Kira had recovered precisely within the time frame Shichiku had anticipated, and that she herself had emerged completely unharmed. There was no need for him to apologize. When he attempted to press the issue, Danya commented that something about him was strange. He constantly described the world as a game, an artificial construct, yet he did not behave as though he truly regarded it as artificial. Shichiku hurried to clarify that he had not intended to make light of her existence. Danya laughed softly, revealing that she had only been teasing him. She had accompanied him into the Arachne subjugation fully aware of the risks because she trusted Kira, and, of course, the hero as well. She told him not to betray those expectations going forward and asked whether he could accept that. Shichiku was taken aback. Danya laughed again, remarking that it sounded amusing when he tried to articulate his thoughts so earnestly. Her laughter carried a light warmth. Shichiku flushed. It was the first time she had addressed him by his name. The irony struck him that Shichiku meant wage slave, a rather awkward name to be spoken at serious moments. It could have just as easily been his real name. Danya asked whether he was still dwelling on something. He dismissed it as nothing. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps shattered the calm. Soldiers rushed toward them, quickly surrounding the pair. Danya demanded to know what they were doing. One of the soldiers declared that Shichiku must be the otherworldly hero and informed him that he was to accompany them to the castle, with no option to refuse. Shichiku wondered what was happening. He did not recall any such event in the storyline. Before the situation could escalate further, another voice intervened, commanding the soldiers to stand down and to refrain from using such overbearing language. The voice declared that she herself had summoned the hero from another world, and that he was an honored guest. Ida stepped forward, positioning herself protectively in front of Shichiku. He stared in confusion before glancing at Danya. A bewildering thought crossed his mind. Was there more than one Ida? He looked closely at the face of the woman standing before him. Ada Falschla was the sole daughter of the Trueli Kingdom's ruler, King Falschla. According to the official Another Verse guidebook, Ida possessed the greatest holy power among all saintesses in recorded history, to such an extent that she was described as having reached the realm of the gods themselves. On that day, within the castle of the capital Falschla, they proceeded toward the princess's tower. Ida instructed the guard to withdraw, explaining that Danya was present and additional protection was unnecessary. The guard complied. They then boarded a floating mechanism resembling an elevator, which carried them upward through the tower. As they ascended, Shichiku's thoughts churned. Both Ida and Danya existed simultaneously before him. How could that be possible? He considered the possibility of some kind of exploit, perhaps a trick enabled by the persistence of clipmakers. In the game, NPCs could be displaced slightly through repeated attacks, allowing them to be nudged across locations little by little until Ida might be forced outside the castle to where Danya stood. Yet Danya had been silent ever since earlier. He began to wonder whether he had truly encountered an unknown bug within the system. Danya abruptly told Ida that she could stop pretending. She addressed Ida by the name Ein instead. Ein responded with mild amusement, remarking that the hero already seemed to know about an older sister. Without warning, Ida began removing her attire. Soft, balloon-like padding fell to the floor. She lowered herself slightly, and in a startling transformation, the figure before them revealed himself to be a man. He commented that Danya must care greatly for the hero. Shichiku stood in shock. As he attempted to process what he was seeing, Danya explained that Shichiku must have already realized the truth. The man before them was Ein, her younger brother, and Ida's body double. Shichiku froze in confusion. Danya appeared surprised by his reaction. He questioned how this could be possible, since Ida was supposed to be an only child. Danya expressed her own astonishment that Shichiku did not know, as she had assumed he was aware of everything concerning their world. The discarded breast enhancement gel pads lay scattered on the floor. Shichiku racked his memory. In Anverse, the total NPC count, including minor mob characters, numbered 1,063. He had memorized every name, background setting, subquest, and movement pattern. There had never been any mention of a body double for Ida, nor any character named Ein. This individual simply did not exist within the known data. Ein remarked to his sister that there was no reason to expect the hero to know. After all, Shichiku hailed from another world, and Ein himself was someone who was never meant to exist in the first place. He explained that the previous king, Liandal VIII, Ida's grandfather, had been a deeply lustful man. Dissatisfied with relationships among nobles and commoners alike, he had taken a drifting prostitute into his bed. From that union, Ein had been born. By blood, he was not Ida's younger brother, but technically her younger uncle. Shichiku could not help but think how awkward it was to learn such origins upon their first meeting. Ein continued, revealing that his mother had succumbed to illness and that he himself had never been formally acknowledged by the royal family. It appeared that the royal family's initial intention had been to quietly disregard Ein's existence, treating him as though he were not there at all. Yet from Shichiku's perspective, the resemblance was undeniable. Ein bore Ida's face with uncanny precision. For that reason, the royal household had secretly brought him in to serve as his elder sister's body double whenever Ida traveled under the identity of Danya. Ein remarked with a light, irreverent laugh that if he was destined to live a passive role regardless, it was far preferable to reside as a princess within castle walls than to waste away in the slums. His tone carried a sharp edge that startled Shichiku. Despite wearing Ida's features, this body double possessed a surprisingly caustic tongue. Ein continued, explaining that only a select few were aware of his existence. His elder sister, Ida's father the king, and Kira, the newly summoned otherworld hero, in theory, should also have known. Shichiku immediately denied any knowledge of him. Danya interjected that ordinary assumptions did not quite apply to the hero, noting that he was somewhat abnormal. Ein questioned what she meant, but quickly shifted the focus, stating that this was no time for prolonged introductions. The hero had subjugated Arachne within 3 days of being summoned. Ein intended to have Shichiku recount every detail of what had transpired. Danya turned her gaze toward Shichiku, as Ein elaborated further. Although the matter did not directly concern the hero personally, one could not simply declare the issue finished after the Demon King's defeat. The subjugation of the Demon King was a central pillar of royal politics. The unprecedented speed at which Arachne had been defeated was already causing significant ripples within both the royal cabinet and the Wise Sage Congress. Danya commented that Ein was exceptionally sharp-minded, often handling her responsibilities as Ida whenever she was absent. Ein explained that the Wise Sage Congress functioned as an advisory body supporting the kingdom, effectively serving as a parliament composed of representatives from the 6 great ducal families, the royal family among them. The House of Lechifica, to which Kira belonged, was one such family, though she herself was not its representative. Shichiku reflected that the Wise Sage Congress had only ever appeared by name within the world of Anverse. According to in-game depictions and subsequent fan inquiries, the Congress feared the overwhelming power of the Demon King and the possibility of retaliation. As a result, They had imposed a strict prohibition against anyone other than the otherworld hero attempting to subjugate the Demon King. Danya remarked that the members of Congress were likely feeling a measure of relief at the news of Arachne's defeat. Shichiku internally acknowledged the irony that only their small group knew the Demon King himself had already been defeated. Ein went on to clarify that, due to the astonishing speed of Arachne's subjugation, the Wise Sage Congress had swiftly demanded an explanation from Guildmaster Kira. It was only natural that they would seek to uncover the truth behind such an unprecedented accomplishment. However, the Kira in question was no passive figure. She was openly defiant toward the Congress. Ein noted that she would undoubtedly sidestep the most critical details in her report. Shichiku recalled Kira's earlier remark that she would conceal his speedrunning ability, and it became clear that Ein had already seen through that intention. Ein explained that this was precisely why he had summoned Shichiku in person. Acting as his elder sister's stand-in, he wanted to hear the unvarnished truth directly, and in greater detail than anyone else. Danya assured Shichiku that she had no objection to him telling Ein everything, including what he had done immediately after being summoned. Shichiku signaled his understanding. Danya then warned Ein that what he was about to hear would sound outrageous, and that he needed to brace himself. Ein responded confidently, stating that he anticipated something extraordinary and would not be so easily shaken. He took pride in being the sagacious Ida's body double and declared that he would not be surprised by a mere story. That composure shattered the moment he learned that the Demon King had already been subjugated. His expression twisted in disbelief as he faltered, questioning what exactly Shichiku meant. Shichiku calmly reiterated that in his original world there existed a competitive practice known as speedrunning, centered on defeating the Demon King as quickly as possible. Ein repeatedly rejected the notion, demanding to know why the Demon King had been targeted first. Shichiku clarified that in the true ending category, the Elite Four were typically dealt with before confronting the Demon King, but at the time he had been pursuing an any percent route. Ein pressed for clarification, unfamiliar with the terminology. Danya observed that Ein's reaction differed subtly from Kira's and found the distinction intriguing. She reminded him that she had already described the hero as abnormal. Ein snapped that there had to be limits to abnormality, limits. In a situation like this, anyone would conceal the truth, especially Kira. He confirmed that only his older sister, the hero, and Kira knew of the Demon King's defeat. Danya affirmed this, adding that the roots of evil had not yet been sealed, and revealing such information prematurely would only create needless confusion. Ein fell into troubled contemplation before declaring that he would trust his older sister's judgment for now. He would attempt to manage the Wise Sage Congress diplomatically and prevent them from interfering with Danya and the hero's activities. However, he pointed directly at Shichiku and made it clear that he did not yet trust him, nor did he trust the hero's incomprehensible power. With a grim expression, Ein stated that he had urgent business requiring attention and that he intended to entrust it to the hero's speedrunning ability. The territory formerly ruled by Arachne lay on the outskirts of the capital, and Ein wanted the hero to oversee the reconstruction of Tadanka village. Danya reacted with surprise. Ein explained that Tadanka village had once been overtaken by Arachne, but with her defeat, it had become unclaimed land. Originally, it had been a prosperous settlement with strong potential for growth due to its proximity to the capital and the presence of a nearby dungeon that attracted adventurers. Such an advantageous location would inevitably tempt scoundrels and demons seeking a foothold. Within 2 or 3 days, news of Arachne's fall would spread across the continent. At worst, another powerful demon might establish a base in the same region. Ein intended to prevent that outcome. He wanted to establish at least minimal infrastructure in Tadanka village as quickly as possible and relocate citizens from the overcrowded capital. Refugees from across the country had already strained the city's capacity, so revitalizing the village would address 2 pressing issues at once. Shichiku shifted uneasily upon hearing that the task must be completed as quickly as possible. Ein observed that the hero seemed remarkably confident in his speed and proposed a time frame of 2 weeks. Danya reacted immediately, clearly unsettled by the suggestion. Ein dismissed her concern, remarking that such a period would hardly hinder their great hero. If speedrunning was truly within his capability, then accomplishing this should be feasible. Danya countered that rebuilding an entire village was ordinarily a project spanning decades. Furthermore, she began to argue that subjugating the Demon King was an entirely different matter, but Ein cut her off, insisting that they would never know unless they attempted it. Privately, Ein harbored no illusion that the hero could truly reconstruct a village in 2 weeks. He did not expect Shichiku to rebuild it from nothing. In reality, Ein had already arranged for the necessary laborers to participate in the official reconstruction. His true objective was to keep the hero stationed in Tadanka village for 2 weeks. Ein acknowledged to himself that the hero possessed extraordinary strength. During the period before the official rebuilding corps arrived, Shichiku would be required to repel the inevitable scoundrels and demons drawn to the now vacant territory. Ein had originally considered hiring other adventurers for that role, but he had decided instead that it would be better to observe the hero directly. Over those 2 weeks, he intended to determine the true nature of the hero's abilities. Ein then addressed Shichiku directly, clarifying that this was not a request issued in the princess's name, but a personal challenge. The hero need only try his best for 2 weeks. Ein claimed he would not grow angry even if the task proved impossible and would even offer gentle consolation should the hero fail. Shichiku sought clarification, asking whether rebuilding the village meant constructing a perimeter wall, 10 houses, a town hall, and preparing the agricultural fields. Ein agreed that such an arrangement would suffice for the time being. Danya reflected that even those minimal requirements would normally demand months of sustained effort. She asked Shichiku whether speedrunning could truly apply to village reconstruction. Shichiku explained that the rebuilding event was essentially a compilation of subquests. It was unnecessary for achieving the true ending. However, if one followed the 100% speedrun route, it could be completed conventionally. Speedrunning was not solely about defeating the Demon King as quickly as possible. Nevertheless, he admitted that this situation differed from the Arachne subjugation. After brief consideration, he estimated that the task might take approximately 30 minutes. Ein was stunned. He demanded to know whether the hero was mocking him. Shichiku appeared taken aback by the reaction. Ein's composure broke as he exclaimed that 30 minutes was an absurd claim. This was not the preparation of a simple meal but the rebuilding of a community, a long and arduous endeavor that could take decades to restore its former prosperity. Shichiku pointed out that Ein himself had proposed a 2-week time frame earlier. Ein acknowledged that he had indeed said so, but insisted there was no conceivable way the hero could accomplish it, deriding him as foolish. Shichiku calmly affirmed the challenge. Inwardly, however, he yearned to return home and regarded Ein as a domineering figure intoxicated with authority. Before the argument could escalate further, Danya intervened, commanding silence. Rising to her feet, she rebuked Ein, stating that she would not tolerate him indulging in pointless tirades, especially while wearing her form, and directing such behavior toward the hero who was striving to save the world. She instructed Ein to reflect on his conduct. Ein offered a guilty apology to his sister. Watching the exchange, Shichiku concluded that Ein was the type who could never prevail in a dispute against his elder sister. Danya, in turn, apologized to Shichiku for Ein's discourtesy. She explained that Ein's skepticism and deliberate provocation stemmed from concern for her safety. At the same time, she pointed out that Shichiku was not an easy individual to trust and that he ought to possess some self-awareness about that fact. Reflecting on his past actions, the wall clipping, the vibrating display, the spinning dash, and even the duplication bug, Shichiku conceded the point. Danya assured Ein that while it was difficult to believe, when it came to speedrunning, Shichiku was capable of accomplishing what he claimed. I need not be so tense. She acknowledged that Shichiku might be somewhat strange, but he was not a bad person. After a brief pause, she amended her statement, emphasizing that Shichiku did not merely stop at being somewhat strange, his oddities were persistent. Ein accepted her reasoning. Later that evening, Shichiku declared his intention to depart for Tadanka village the following morning. If events unfolded according to plan, he anticipated finishing before noon. Ein reiterated that he had not yet placed his trust in the hero. Shichiku suggested that Ein come and observe firsthand, reasoning that direct witness would be more convincing than words. Ein replied that he was occupied with a Congress meeting regarding Arachne's subjugation the next day and could not be underestimated in his duties as a princess's stand-in. However, if circumstances allowed, he might visit in the afternoon. He instructed Shichiku to give his utmost effort. They once again boarded the floating elevator-like device. As they ascended, Shichiku's thoughts returned to Ein. An NPC absent from Anver's documented roster, Ida's body double. If he treated Anverse as a living, breathing world rather than a mere game, it would not be strange for someone like Ein to exist. He could no longer dismiss such individuals as artificial constructs. In the bond between Ein and Danya, he could feel genuine humanity. Since arriving in this world, he had begun to perceive Danya and Kira as flesh and blood people. Although the original game had been praised for its lifelike NPC behavior, this experience felt different. It was as though he were venturing behind the scenes of the world, into layers never depicted within the game itself. For an Anverse enthusiast, this was the height of fascination. Perhaps Ein was not someone who did not exist in Anverse, but rather someone who simply never appeared within the visible scope of the game. That possibility unsettled him. A speedrun route was the product of meticulous optimization of known variables. If unknown elements existed, then the established route might no longer hold validity. The greatest threat to any speedrun was the emergence of unforeseen variables. Danya noticed his troubled expression and asked what was wrong. Shichiko looked at her. In his mind, he realized it might already be too late to worry about irregularities. The fact that Danya could speak to him so freely was itself an anomaly beyond the game's original framework. Wasn't speedrunning, at its core, about adapting to the unexpected? He told Danya that he was simply hoping, praying, that he could complete his run tomorrow. Danya echoed the word, puzzled. At that very moment, on the outskirts of what had once been Tadanka village, goblins emerged from the shadows. Eliha began chanting and invoked Primus Ignis. Flames erupted, engulfing the goblins in her power. Behind her stood members of the Silver Dragon Fong Party, including Mashimu and Lutul. Eliha observed that the number of monsters in the area had noticeably decreased. They were performing admirably in repelling them, and appeared to be meeting Ida's expectations without incident. Mashimu remarked that, as it happened, Ida had just honored them with a letter, and that the otherworld hero would be heading there the following day. Eliha questioned whether the hero had truly defeated Arachne, noting that only 3 days had passed since the summoning. Even with Kira of the Lachifica house involved, the situation felt excessively eccentric. She found herself wondering what sort of tactics the hero could have employed, concluding that it must have been the hero's magic. The request delivered in the letter was for them to assist the hero in rebuilding Tadanka village and to submit a detailed report of the hero's actions. The tone of the request felt less like a call for assistance and more like an investigation. It appeared that Ida herself had taken a considerable interest in the hero. Mashimu stated that, regardless, they would have to apologize to the hero the next day for having underestimated him as nothing more than a novice freshly summoned into the world. Eliha smiled at this, and Lutul gave a nod of agreement. Suddenly, Lutul sensed something amiss. A low growl escaped him as he detected the presence of a powerful demon nearby. Eliha and Mashimu were startled by the warning. Activating his skill, Wolf's Reveal, Lutul expanded his perception, gaining clear sight of the surrounding area even in the depths of night. Both he and Mashimu tensed, fully alert. A slime was approaching. Yet before Mashimu could properly identify it, the slime slipped past him. In the next instant, Lutul's upper body was erased as though wiped from existence. Mashimu cried out Lutul's name, his eyes widening in shock. The slime commented on the taste, speculating that it had consumed a silver wolf and recalling that the species was considered endangered, adding that it had once eaten many of them. The slime's form shifted and morphed into Raspy, who asked if his assumption had been correct. Raspy failed to notice an incoming strike, and his arm was sliced cleanly off. He examined the severed limb and turned his gaze toward Mashimu. Mashimu muttered that he had missed the core, reflecting that he had believed a slime's movements would dull immediately after feeding. Even so, he admitted to himself that maintaining composure under these circumstances was difficult. Raspy regenerated effortlessly and mockingly commented on how frightening the situation was. He taunted Mashimu, telling him not to become angry merely because his pet dog had been eaten. Mashimu ordered him to be silent and stepped forward, while Eliha called out to him. He reassured her that he was fine and casually promised to buy her whatever she desired later, even that trendy lipstick, in exchange for 200 years' worth of her mana. Eliha replied internally that even if he purchased every cosmetic item across the continent, it would not make the trade worthwhile. The legendary beastman Silver Wolf, Lutul, had been slaughtered in a single instant. Eliha concluded that this creature unquestionably belonged to Elite 4 class. She sliced her own wrist without hesitation. Within her mind lay an ancient rune she had cultivated over 1,000 years. Having restrained herself from going wild for 2 centuries, she resolved to grant Mashimu the use of her left hand. She declared that they had kept Raspy waiting long enough. Mana poured from her in overwhelming torrents as she and Mashimu advanced together. Mashimu announced that it was time for a special hyperdiscipline session for an unruly brat, with Raspy's life serving as the tuition fee. Later, however, Raspy was seen stretching lazily beside a campfire. He rubbed his belly, remarking to himself that he had eaten and eaten. He had expected Mashimu to demonstrate something impressive, but what he encountered had merely been a man possessed by an evil dragon. Allowing Mashimu to cut him had been a waste. A large-scale release of accumulated mana held no appeal, lacking novelty. The Silver Wolf had been pathetic. None of it was outrageous or new. It was all knowledge he already possessed. In his view, the world had grown outdated and dull. Boredom consumed him. He then observed a scroll bearing a royal crest. Recognition dawned, and his eyes sparkled with anticipation. At last, he would meet the otherworld hero. Mimicking the tone of the Silver Dragon Fong Party, he vowed to extract every hidden secret the hero carried and to savor the hero's essence down to the marrow. At the beginning of Chapter 12, Kira learned that Shichiku had already met Ein. She revealed that Ein had attempted to contact her even before reviewing her report, remarking inwardly on how crafty the boy was. Shichiku noticed that Kira had returned to wearing her bikini armor and asked whether she was on bad terms with Ein. Kira explained that their relationship was neither good nor bad. Ein was a contrary individual, likely shaped by his upbringing, and he did not open his heart easily. Testing Shichiku in such a manner was entirely characteristic of him. As far as Kira knew, the only person Ein truly opened up to was Ida. Danya expressed her belief that Ein might actually like Kira. Kira questioned that notion, observing that Ein was always looking downward and never made eye contact with her. Shichiku found himself reflecting on the strange sensation of listening to NPCs he knew discuss another NPC he did not recognize. The experience left him feeling alienated, as though excluded from something fundamental. Someone waved toward them, drawing their attention. Mashimu stepped forward to welcome Kira and the otherworld hero to Tadanka village. Later, inside a tent, Mashimu introduced them to the Silver Dragon Fong, an S-rank party from the guild Dragonbones Sign. Dragonbones Sign was the guild that presided over the primeval forest of dragon bones in the southern region of the kingdom. Mashimu identified himself as the leader, a gladiator, and then introduced Elaha and Ludol. He explained that they had come to assist the otherworld hero personally appointed by Ida, and that they stood ready to fulfill any need the hero might have, including demon extermination. They were, in every sense, at the hero's service. Kira silently concluded that these must be Ain's observers. She introduced herself in turn, presenting her crest, and stating that she was the guild master of Shield of Ada. Even so, she emphasized that she was merely another adventurer and required no formal treatment befitting nobility. Mashimu responded that this simplified matters greatly, as he admitted to being poor at royal etiquette. Shichiku reflected on the S-rank party known as the Silver Dragon Fong, composed of Mashimu, Elaha, and Ludol. In his memories of Inverse, they were mercenaries who could be summoned during battle. This was the first time he had ever seen them speak, as previously he had known only their names and techniques within the game. Despite the strangeness of the situation, he felt relieved. Unlike Ain, these were NPCs he recognized. Mashimu's gaze settled on Shichiku. Within him, Raspi quivered with excitement at finally meeting the otherworld hero. Raspi observed the wooden stick and confirmed that it was genuine. As a high-grade slime, Raspi possessed the special ability Brain Gourmand, which allowed him to acquire all of a target's memories after consuming their brain. He had already devoured 3 individuals flawlessly, and no one had suspected a thing. The otherworld hero possessed a powerful, yet peculiar skill. Though Raspi could have been content with merely obtaining the wooden stick, he desired everything the hero had to offer. Such a feast appeared only once in a millennium, and devouring the hero immediately would be a waste. Kira remarked upon the fame and reliability of the Silver Dragon Fong before stating that they would introduce themselves as well. She presented Shichiku as the otherworld hero summoned by Ida only a few days prior. When she turned toward Danya, Danya introduced herself as the cat mage Danya, Ida's favorite and dependable kitty, punctuating her declaration with a characteristic feline inflection. Shichiku noticed the familiar Naya once again. Ludol emitted a low growl, and Elaha explained that the silver wolf was merely expressing jealousy at how fluently Danya spoke the human tongue, praising the cat mage as both cute and clever. Shichiku remembered that the 3 adventurers were unaware of Danya's true identity. Although she could function perfectly well in her Ida mode, Danya had to maintain her current persona. Thinking of her in that cute form brought Shichiku a sense of security reminiscent of home. His thoughts were interrupted when someone called out to him. Elaha explained that she had heard rumors of his subjugation of Arachne and asked what kind of miracle he had used. Shichiku flushed with embarrassment and explained that he had merely performed his usual speedrunning. Elaha inquired further, and before Kira could interject, Elaha remarked that the concept was fascinating, wondering if this was the hero's magic. She shared that she had embarked on her journey to master magic and uncover the truth of all things. If she could learn this speedrunning method like the hero, she believed she might move closer to fulfilling her wish. Elaha reached out and held Shichiku's hand, asking him to teach her. Kira's expression darkened at the sight. Within Shichiku, Raspi observed keenly, reflecting that human males were often susceptible to such gestures. Shichiku asked whether Elaha truly wished to learn everything about speedrunning. Grasping her hand enthusiastically, he declared that he would teach her all of it, from routes to glitches, so that they could speedrun and verse together. Kira reacted in shock, pulling Shichiku aside and questioning what he was thinking. He had only just met Elaha and should not so readily reveal his hand. She accused herself of misjudging him, wondering if he was simply swayed by the presence of a beautiful woman. Shichiku appeared confused by her implication and clarified that this was about welcoming a newcomer to Anverse speedrunning. As a hardcore player, he felt obligated to treat beginners properly. When Kira pressed further, Shichiku explained that he had already discussed this with Danya before. The speedrunning routes of Anverse, or rather the guides, were not created by him alone. Across the world, there were roughly 500 Anverse speedrunners. They shared information about newly discovered glitches, and the collective competition for the fastest time had produced what could only be described as the fruit of shared wisdom. Years had passed since Anverse first hit the stores, and recent discoveries were becoming rarer and purer in nature. As a result, the established routes had grown increasingly strict. When Kira asked what that meant, Shichiku elaborated that speedrunning without new discoveries became an exercise in tracing existing routes with as few mistakes as possible. Saving time under such conditions was extraordinarily difficult, and running in that manner could be mentally exhausting, even if it retained its own unique appeal. Kira questioned whether speedrunning was meant to be a game in his world. Shichiku turned back to Elaha and explained that this was precisely why a new point of view was necessary, an influx of newcomers. Relying solely on veterans would eventually lead to stagnation against an unbreakable wall. Increasing the number of runners naturally increased the probability of new discoveries. The wall clip used in the current any % route for Arachne, for example, had been discovered by a runner with only 2 weeks of experience. Inverse any % Japan 4th place, Sadagen Suzine. She had casually mentioned managing to clip through the wall there and unexpectedly reaching the final boss directly. The influx of newcomers, Shichiku emphasized, was the golden key to a faster route. He wanted to cultivate new comrades in speedrunning by respectfully supporting beginners. That was why, even when confronted by the intimidating older man known as Anverse any % world 2nd place, Kanetama Tikoku, who had once asked Shichiku to guide him at an event, he had patiently taught him the intricacies of Anverse. Kira expressed her understanding and offered an apology. Inside, Raspy reflected on the concept of speedrunning, concluding that if it was something anyone could grasp with a bit of learning, then acquiring the hero's memories through Brain Gourmand would make mastering it trivial. The thought made him eager to witness Shichiku perform a live speedrun. Suddenly, Danya struck Shichiku from behind. She admonished him to conduct such recruitment efforts back in his own world. Shichiku immediately complied. Inwardly, he admitted that he had become carried away discussing speedrunning and resolved to reflect on his behavior. Shichiku called out to Kira and explained that the rebuilding speedrun route was fundamentally unrelated to the true ending, so there would be no adverse consequences even if others learned about it. Kira questioned whether that was truly the case, but Shichiku insisted that, while the momentum was still fresh, they should immediately begin the rebuilding speedrun. Within him, Raspy stirred with anticipation. Before they could proceed, Danya stopped Shichiku and reminded him that there was something they needed to do prior to starting the rebuilding effort. Together, they made their way into the village. There, they placed flowers upon the ground in remembrance. Danya gazed quietly at the offering as a solemn atmosphere settled over the group. Everyone bowed their heads and offered prayers for those who had perished. They entrusted the innocent and pitiful souls to eternal healing, wishing that within the embrace of their merciful goddess they might find peace and blessing. After the prayer, Shichiku slowly opened his eyes. Mashimu remarked upon Danya's remarkable fluency in the human tongue. Danya explained that the requiem was something she had learned directly from Ida. With the moment of mourning concluded, Shichiku declared that they would begin at once. The first step was to retrieve the item he had purchased in the capital. Kira reacted with surprise as Shichiku produced a pan, announcing that the timer for the Tadanka village rebuilding speedrun had now begun. The sight of him holding a frying pan left everyone present utterly baffled. Within the depths of Falschlaw's dungeon, evil spirits gathered in the underground abyss. Branches thick with miasma flowed outward from the roots of corruption, saturating the labyrinth in a dense, malignant aura. Because of this powerful miasma, monsters that had been defeated would inevitably revive one day after their death. Such was the description recorded in the official guidebook of another verse. Later, on the underground first floor of the Falschlaw dungeon, the group arrived at 1 minute and 15 seconds. Shichiku explained that the key to the rebuilding speedrun lay in gathering materials from a dungeon near the village. For the moment, their focus would be on defeating monsters to obtain drop items. Mashimu acknowledged the plan, while within him Raspy regarded it as somewhat unimpressive. Soon, a monster appeared before them, a frogman. Raspy judged the situation bothersome. If he failed to fight, suspicion might fall upon him. The silver dragon Fong immediately engaged the creature. However, the hero, Danya, and Kira ran straight past the battle. Shichiku explained that the dungeon contained one mini-boss every 5 floors, and what they required was the mini-boss on underground floor 5. Engaging other monsters would only waste time, so they would ignore them. Raspy realized that this was the strategy. Kira remarked that Shichiku had already executed this same maneuver the previous day and the day before. Danya commented that this was far easier compared to dealing with the spiders. At 2 minutes and 4 seconds, they reached underground floor 5. A stone golem awaited them. Shichiku described it as the principal obstacle before them. Massive in size, possessing formidable defense and immense HP, and a daunting challenge for beginners. He struck the golem with his wooden stick and calmly stated that a single blow from the strange rod was sufficient. With that, the subquest of the Falschlaw dungeon, the Stone Giant, was cleared. Raspy found himself astonished by the wooden stick's power. Shichiku explained that defeating the stone golem yielded 12 stones. Among the drops, he noticed an adamantine flower, observing that the random number generation seemed favorable that day. They would require a total of 180 stones to reconstruct the curtain wall and the housing of the village. Although they could employ the duplication bug if they were gathering only stones, this time they needed 3 additional types of random drops. Therefore, they would continue defeating the stone golem until they had acquired everything necessary. Kira questioned how that was possible, pointing out that he had just defeated the stone golem. Danya explained that regardless of the density of miasma within a dungeon, defeated monsters would not revive until at least the following day. Shichiku responded that this was precisely where the frying pan became relevant. For the moment, they returned to underground floor 4. Near the staircase, There was a treasure chest containing healing items and a hearth designated for cooking. It resembled the recovery areas commonly placed before boss battles in many games. Here, Shichiku prepared to use the frying pan. Raspy idly wondered why such a conveniently placed area existed. Elaha speculated whether it was because one could not fight effectively on an empty stomach. Shichiku lifted the pan and clarified that his intention was not to cook, but to induce system lag by repeatedly equipping and unequipping the frying pan in rapid succession. The three members of the Silver Dragon Fong stared in shock, while Kira and Danya appeared visibly uneasy. After a moment, Shichiku stopped and declared the attempt successful. He explained that they now existed in a state where the frying pan was both equipped and not equipped simultaneously. They had entered a superposition state. Kira, bewildered, asked what that meant. Danya questioned how this differed from the duplication bug he had demonstrated previously. Shichiku explained that while the cooking command in the game was normally restricted to preparing food items, the superposition state allowed them to accomplish what should have been impossible. In this condition, even gold coins could be cooked. The others stared at him in disbelief as he began stir-frying gold coins, garnishing them with vegetables as though they were ordinary ingredients. Kira and Danya watched in shock as he calmly cooked currency in the pan. Within, Raspy wondered whether this phenomenon bore any connection to that old hag Arachne. Shichiku continued his bizarre culinary process and soon declared that it was complete. He announced the creation of object number 151, a bug meal labeled simply with the words, "No image." Kira and Danya were unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Raspy, however, was visibly shaken. When Kira demanded an explanation, Shichiku clarified that in-used data left over from development but not implemented in the finished game was referred to as in-used items. If erased carelessly, such data could potentially trigger new bugs. The appearance of an error message likely indicated that graphics for this object had once been considered but never finalized. Danya inquired about the implications of the error. Shichiku responded by demonstrating that, as it was classified as a meal, it could technically be consumed. Kira recoiled in alarm as he brought it to his mouth, and Danya urgently urged him to spit it out. Both fell silent after he swallowed it in a single gulp. After consuming object number 151, Shichiku returned to underground floor 5. The group was stunned to find that the stone golems had already revived. Shichiku explained that object number 151 did not advance in game time as displayed on the timer. However, volunteer analysis by players had revealed that within the game's internal system, one full day still passed. Since the item had never been implemented, its intended purpose remained unknown. What was known was that eating it caused one day to pass within the system without advancing the visible game timer. In Anver's speedrunning, it was referred to as the meal that leaps through time. He checked the timer, 3 minutes and 16 seconds. Thanks to the meal that leaps through time, they could repeatedly hunt the stone golem as many times as desired within what appeared to be a single day. They would continue looping the process until all necessary stones and drop items were secured, ideally completing the task within approximately 15 loops. Elaha quietly admitted to Kira that she could not truly grasp the meaning behind Shichiku's explanation. Kira responded that she did not fully understand it either. It seemed likely that Shichiku was not explaining it for their sake at all, but rather narrating his speedrunning methodology to himself. Within him, Raspy observed that the otherworld hero had a remarkable tendency toward monologue. 16 minutes later, their inventory held 216 stones, along with a dragon claw opal, silver fluorite, dwarven dice, and an adamantine flower. Shichiku declared that after 18 loops, they had gathered all the required materials. The next step was to return to the village using Matatabi travel. He asked Danya to handle it. Danya agreed and retrieved her Matatabi item. After rattling it and declaring their destination as Tadanka village, they vanished from the dungeon. At 19 minutes and 53 seconds, they reappeared in Tadanka village. Shichiku announced that the stones would now be placed in the material yard. With all raw materials secured from the dungeon, only manpower remained necessary. He then instructed Danya to use Matatabi travel once more, this time to take them to the capital. Danya agreed without hesitation. Within Mashimu's body, Raspy felt a surge of alarm. Seizing control, he attempted to object, suggesting that they remain behind to guard the gathered materials. However, Danya had already shaken the teleportation item and activated the transfer to the capital, Falshla. Their bodies shot upward and sped toward the capital. Yet as they neared the protective barriers surrounding the city, they were violently repelled. The impact produced a sound that caught the attention of a nearby guard. In the next instant, there was a splash, and the guard was swallowed by a mass of slime. The slime shifted and reformed into Raspy, who immediately cursed the barrier that had obstructed their entry. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild Shield of Ida, Kira wondered about the whereabouts of the other three who had teleported alongside them. Danya contacted her, urging haste as Shichiku was prepared to proceed ahead without delay. Kira reflected uneasily on the three who had vanished during the transfer. At 20 minutes and 58 seconds, they arrived at the Carpenters Guild known as the Gnome Group. A gnome erupted into curses at their sudden intrusion. He was Baron Mei, chief of the gnome group, one of the 5 great guilds. Baron bristled at the notion that the hero had barged in to request the loan of his craftsmen, dismissing the idea as absurd. He continued his tirade, proclaiming that his workshop personnel were all first-rate artisans. The capital's town walls had been constructed by the gnome group, and even the overnight castle of Falschla had been their achievement 2 generations prior. They accepted only first-rate commissions and would never entertain a request from someone like Shichiku. He ordered the hero not to return. Shichiku observed that although Baron spoke at great length, his rapid pace was advantageous. He asked what would be required for Baron to acknowledge him as first-rate. Baron responded with further curses, telling him to use his brain. If he was truly an adventurer, he should begin by presenting rare items. For starters, he could bring an adamantine flower or 2. Without hesitation, Shichiku produced an adamantine flower. Baron paused, recognizing that such a flower could only be obtained from the nearby dungeon. The young man was not entirely incompetent. Baron admitted that Shichiku had nerve but insisted that a true first-rate adventurer would at least possess some dwarven dice. Shichiku handed them over immediately. Baron then demanded silver fluorite, which Shichiku promptly presented. A dragon claw opal was required next, and once again Shichiku produced it without delay. Baron found himself unsettled. How had Shichiku anticipated each demand before it was spoken? A suspicion flickered through his mind that perhaps the hero could read thoughts. He wondered whether Shichiku had discerned the truth, that gnomes often resorted to bluster and bravado to avoid being looked down upon by humans. Had their facade been exposed? After a moment of muttering, Baron conceded his approval. Tadanka village, or whatever it was called, could have the gnome group's craftsmen. Shichiku was free to take them as needed. Even as he granted permission, Baron muttered insults, labeling Shichiku a thief and kidnapper. With that, the subquest stubborn man was cleared. At 23 minutes and 3 seconds, Shichiku declared that they had successfully secured a construction request from the gnome group's carpenters. To complete the chief's quest, they had relied on repeated loops of the stone golem to gather the necessary rare materials. He then instructed Danya to transport them back to Tadanka village once more. Danya remarked that Shichiku was certainly in a hurry, and they activated Matatabi travel once more. In an instant, they reappeared in Tadanka village. Kira's eyes widened in astonishment. At 23 minutes and 40 seconds, the foundations of multiple structures had already been laid. She struggled to reconcile the sight before her with the fact that they had only just been there moments ago. Danya questioned why frames were already standing. Shichiku explained that this was the result of having set the flag for the gnome group to begin work. The necessary materials had already been placed in advance. By reloading the map through Matatabi travel, the in-progress construction would manifest immediately. Since the curtain walls, houses, and the village town hall were assigned to the gnomes, he would personally handle preparation of the fields. They retrieved a farmer's hoe from the village ruins. Shichiku began tilling the soil, explaining that the process was deceptively simple, plowing the ground while moving rhythmically side to side, advancing one step at a time in repetition. Though it appeared ordinary at first glance, he was in fact trimming excess animation frames with each motion. By accumulating small time saves in this manner, runners could demonstrate their skill in a 100% speedrun category. Kira responded that after witnessing a succession of incomprehensible exploits, it was oddly reassuring to see Shichiku moving in what appeared to be a normal fashion. Danya urged her to remain cautious, remarking that Kira seemed almost poisoned by the abnormality of the situation and reminding her that none of this was truly normal. At that moment, Mashimu and the others returned, calling out to Kira and Danya. Danya inquired where they had gone. Mashimu explained that goblins had been loitering on the outskirts of the village, requiring their attention. As he spoke, he observed that they had only looked away briefly, yet the village had already transformed into something remarkable. Danya was about to comment when Shichiku announced that field preparation was complete. Now they needed only to wait for the gnomes to finish their assigned construction. At 27 minutes and 2 seconds, Danya reminded Shichiku that the village restoration speedrun had a 30-minute target. However, from her perspective, completing the remaining work within 3 minutes seemed impossible. Shichiku asked whether she had forgotten something and produced the no image item. Danya recoiled in shock. Shichiku calmly revealed that he had crafted extras earlier. Kira and Danya could only stare as he began consuming it again. Darkness followed briefly. Shichiku commented that because there were numerous new objects to fetch, the loading process took slightly longer. Then, in an instant, the subquest Tadanka village restoration was declared complete. The timer read 28 minutes and 37 seconds. The entire party stood stunned, jaws agape, including Kira and Danya. Shichiku instructed the timer to stop, formally concluding the Tadanka village restoration speedrun. Kira murmured that such a feat was impossible. Danya pointed out the exhausted state of the gnomes, who appeared utterly drained. Shichiku transitioned into post-run commentary. A 28-minute completion was a strong record compared to their 30-minute estimate. Their success had been aided by favorable item drops, requiring only 18 stone golem loops and minimizing excessive reliance on random number manipulation. Within, Raspy felt a thrill. This was speedrunning. He pondered his next move, sensing that he could no longer restrain himself. Beneath Elaha's disguise, Raspy drooled as he watched Shichiku continue analyzing the run, noting that any potential improvement would likely come from refining the system lag technique using the frying pan. At the royal castle located approximately 2 kilometers away from Tadanka village, Ein raised his binoculars and gazed into the distance. The sight unfolding before him left him in profound shock. The guard standing beside him stepped forward, awaiting instruction. Ein ordered the immediate preparation of a carriage bound for Tadanka village. The guard respectfully reminded him that the princess was scheduled to attend a meeting with the Wise Sages Congress that afternoon. Ein dismissed the concern and instructed that the meeting be postponed, noting that most matters had already been addressed during the morning session. He further commanded the guard to hurry and summon the individual from the village as well. The guard promptly departed to carry out the orders. Left alone, Ein clenched his fist and muttered to himself that the hero had truly accomplished it. Meanwhile, in Tadanka village, Raspy, disguised as Elaha, struggled to restrain his urges. The thought of consuming raw otherworld heroes filled him with anticipation, as though he were about to partake in a lavish meal. However, he realized that devouring 4 humans raw in succession might not yield the finest flavor. Since he had come this far, he considered preparing them as a confit instead. Yet a troubling thought crossed his mind. Perhaps the hero had already become aware of his presence through the hero's route. At that moment, Shichiku experienced an uneasy sensation, as though someone were staring at him from behind. When he turned his head, he saw Elaha looking startled. She hastily wiped away the drool at the corner of her mouth and attempted to compose herself. Shichiku, suspicious, questioned whether she was truly that hungry. Elaha was visibly shaken by the inquiry. Before the tension could escalate further, an array of dishes was suddenly presented. Tadanka-style mixed stew, vegetable macaroni gratin, grilled mushrooms seasoned with medicinal herbs, a crunchy lettuce sandwich, falschla bison roast, and forest berry cake. All spread among those present. The spread had been prepared through the use of Shichiku's cooking command. Although doubts lingered regarding its edibility and whether unusual ingredients such as gold coins had been used, Shichiku clarified that the meal consisted entirely of ordinary foodstuffs he had purchased while reorganizing his inventory. He recognized from their wary expressions that they did not fully trust him. The gnomes abruptly sprang into action, seizing the dishes and devouring them eagerly. Their delight was unmistakable. Concerns were briefly raised about whether the gnomes would begin vibrating afterward, but Shichiku reassured everyone that no such phenomenon would occur. Raspy observed the scene carefully and concluded that his disguise had not been exposed. Kira turned toward Elaha and suggested that they should dine as well. Upon tasting the food, Kira found it far more delicious than she had anticipated, with no abnormal effects whatsoever. Raspy took note of Kira's presence. She was known as the kingdom's strongest female knight, Kira Re-Lechifica. Despite her formidable reputation, she remained human. Elaha expressed willingness to partake in the meal. Suddenly, the sound of an approaching carriage drew attention. Danya and Shichiku moved to meet it and were stunned to see Ein arrive in person. Ein declared that the otherworld hero had truly succeeded. Kira observed Ein's haste and understood the urgency that compelled him to rush there. She quietly remarked that Ida herself had graced the sight, finding great pleasure in welcoming him. Ein's gaze briefly lingered on Kira's ample chest, and an inappropriate thought crossed his mind before he formally greeted her. Raspy, still disguised as Elaha, was taken aback by Ida's presence and questioned internally whether she had intentionally come all this way. A grin slowly spread across his face. Ein proceeded to inspect the walls and confirmed that they were not constructed of papier-mâché. Shichiku explained that the structures had been properly built through the collective efforts of the gnome group. Ein stated that of course he needed to inspect the site personally. Houses had been erected with a speed comparable to the sudden appearance of an overnight castle, which made the situation far too unnatural to ignore. The rapid reconstruction unsettled him, and he admitted that he was now even concerned for his elder sister, who had to work alongside Shichiku. Shichiku was taken aback by the implication that Ein still harbored doubts about him. Ein turned his gaze away and slowly closed his eyes. Acknowledging the extraordinary feat of laying the foundation and rebuilding the village at such remarkable speed, he lowered his head toward Shichiku in a gesture of gratitude. He expressed his thanks to the otherworld hero. Shichiku, caught off guard by the sudden display of respect, accepted the gratitude. Ein then revealed that he had not come alone. He had brought someone who rightfully belonged there. At his signal, an elderly woman stepped forward. Ein explained that she was originally from Tadanka village. Upon seeing her, Danya and Shichiku immediately recognized her. The old woman stood frozen as her eyes took in the surroundings. She remarked that although the scenery differed somewhat from her memories, the distinctive stone houses unique to the village remained unchanged. The sight felt almost dreamlike to her. Her gaze then shifted to the group standing behind Shichiku. She abruptly halted and fixed them with a sharp glare. Activating her bestowed skill known as judgment, she perceived the presence of a monster concealed in disguise. She cried out in warning, urging Shichiku to look behind him. In an instant, 3 figures transformed, merging into the true form of Raspy. At the same time, Kira seized Shichiku and pulled him away as a deafening explosion erupted. When the dust settled, a gaping hole scarred the ground where they had stood. Raspy appeared shocked that his attack had struck nothing. In the next heartbeat, a blade flashed toward him, piercing his eye. Kira followed through with a powerful slash that split him in half. Yet instead of collapsing, Raspy's body emitted a glow before he fled. Cursing under his breath about his core, Raspy retreated. Shichiku and the elderly woman stared in alarm. Shichiku questioned how Raspy, one of the Elite Four, had appeared there. Kira confirmed that this was indeed Raspy of the Elite Four. Danya was left speechless, and Ein and his guard were equally stunned. Raspy mockingly remarked that he seemed to have gained celebrity status and felt flattered by the recognition. Kira's thoughts raced. Raspy was known as the hungering quagmire. She wondered about his objective, whether he sought revenge for Arachne, reconnaissance on the otherworld hero, or something else entirely. She also questioned why Shichiku remained motionless. She recalled rumors that those devoured by Raspy had both their appearance and memory stolen. Acting on that suspicion, she demanded to know whether Raspy had devoured the silver dragon fawn. Raspy casually implied that he had merely been hungry. Internally, Raspy found the bold and brazen female knight irritating, yet he acknowledged that spirited humans tasted the best. Licking his lips, he concluded that with such a formidable knight present, he could not leisurely enjoy his intended meal. Instead, he decided to take the stick as a souvenir. Kira reacted in shock. Shichiku glanced downward and realized that the wooden stick he carried was gone. Raspy then suggested that perhaps it was time for him to return home. As he spat toward Danya and Ida, Kira moved with swift precision, intercepting to protect Danya. Though Danya escaped harm, Raspy managed to seize Ein. The old woman and Shichiku were stunned as Raspy restrained him. Raspy briefly questioned why the female knight had prioritized protecting the kitty, but he dismissed the thought. Addressing the otherworld hero, Raspy declared that he had not yet abandoned the true main dish, the speedrunning route contained within Shichiku's mind. Summoning his movement magic, he opened a black hole-like portal. He proclaimed that if the hero wished to see their princess returned, they should come to the swamp of starvation. Should the hero delay, he might devour the princess. With that threat delivered, Raspy vanished from sight. Kira hurled a curse at Raspy as everyone instinctively lifted their gaze toward the sky, where he had vanished. Shichiku stood in stunned silence, trying to process what had just unfolded. Raspy of the Elite Four had emerged from the swamp of starvation, stolen his strange wooden rod, and abducted Ein, an NPC who was never meant to appear in this sequence. Such a development had never existed within Anverse. The scenario was entirely unprecedented. Danya's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts as she urged him to hurry and save Ein. There was no time to lose. If they delayed, Ein would surely be killed. However, another voice opposed the immediate charge forward. Kira stepped in and demanded that Shichiku answer her honestly. The ambush had clearly fallen outside his expectations. Shichiku remained silent. Kira pressed further. The Shichiku she knew would not lose his composure from a mere surprise attack. The fact that he had been caught off guard meant that this confrontation with the slime was not part of his speedrunning route. On top of that, his precious stockpile of wooden sticks, his treasured items, had been stolen. She questioned whether the once-in-a-century otherworld hero intended to throw his life away meaninglessly. Even if it required time, they needed to prepare thoroughly before facing such a threat. After a brief pause, Kira added that body doubles existed precisely for situations like this. Danya's eyes widened at the implication, and she lowered her gaze. Shichiku noticed her reaction, his own eyes widening as he looked toward her. He finally spoke, acknowledging that while Raspy's sudden appearance had been outside his calculations, there was no doubt that the enemy was indeed the same Elite Four Raspy he knew. The mention of the swamp of starvation clarified their destination. Since Raspy had retreated to his dwelling, the situation had effectively returned them to the regular route. In that territory, Shichiku believed there was ample opportunity to secure victory, largely thanks to Kira's counterattack earlier. Although reclaiming the strange rod would be difficult, he insisted that alternative methods to defeat Raspy existed. He admitted that he had shown an embarrassing display during the confrontation, but vowed to compensate with backup strategies. This time, they would rescue Ein at a world record pace. Danya was visibly moved by his renewed resolve. Kira remarked that this was the Shichiku she recognized. However, she pointed out the logistical reality. The swamp of starvation lay to the south of the continent. To reach it, they would need to cross the Dragon's Tail mountain range. Traveling around it by land would take 2 weeks. Moreover, the farther one ventured from the capital, the stronger and larger the monsters became. Even griffins were incapable of scaling that mountain range at such altitude, making an aerial route equally unfeasible. Shichiku dismissed these concerns. There was no need to worry, as there existed a perfect glitch for this exact predicament. It was a glitch that played a critical role in the 100% speedrun. By passing through the underground world, they could arrive at the Swamp of Starvation in merely 15 minutes. At the mention of the underground world, both Kira and Danya stood frozen in shock, their jaws dropping at the revelation. As she moved through the oppressive darkness, Kira found herself questioning how events had escalated to this point. She had prepared herself for any eventuality. No, she had intended to be prepared, but an undercurrent of unease gnawed at her as she contemplated what they were about to attempt. The place they now traversed was the underground world. Only 6 minutes earlier, they had been asking about it. At that time, Kira had reasoned that even if it truly took 15 minutes to reach their destination, Ain would not be in immediate peril. Raspi's true target was Shichiku. There was little sense in killing a hostage unnecessarily. Danya had countered that such reasoning only held if the hostage were the real Ida. To support her point, she revealed a necklace bearing a twin crystal. Ain possessed its counterpart. The crystal would shatter at the moment the other bearer's life ended. It had originally been crafted as a safeguard in case something happened to Danya herself. Shichiku had considered the implication. If Raspi discovered that Ain was an imposter, there would be no reason to keep him alive. With that realization, he insisted that they needed to hurry. Kira accepted the need for speed but pressed him for clarification about what he meant by the underground world. Danya confessed that she harbored nothing but foreboding about it. Shichika hesitated before admitting the truth. Of all the routes he had encountered thus far, this was the most dangerous. If something went wrong, death would not be the only consequence. There was even the possibility of crashing the game itself. Kira inquired whether that meant some form of catastrophic impact. Danya, bewildered, murmured that he had seemed so confident only moments earlier. Shichiku clarified that the worst outcome would occur only if they failed. Even so, if they were to reach the Swamp of Starvation before Ain's false identity was exposed, they had no alternative. Danya fell silent. Kira then declared that hesitation served no purpose. Though she did not fully grasp what a crash entailed, she understood the gravity of the danger. Moreover, she resolved that she would never again yield to fear. Shichiku responded that they would depart immediately. With determined enthusiasm, he proclaimed the start of the Swamp of Starvation speedrun and mentally began the timer. Danya cautioned him against getting carried away. Their first destination was the capital. Within its slums lay an entrance colloquially known as the Rat's Den. Shichiku explained that beneath the capital's slum district ran an underground waterway currently under construction. True to its nature, it occupied the lowest point in the entire capital. Kira and Danya unconsciously held their breath as they proceeded. Danya noticed a homeless figure nearby as they passed through the grim surroundings. At 3 minutes and 8 seconds, Shichiku announced that they had reached their destination. Kira halted him and asked whether they were not supposed to be heading to the Swamp of Starvation. Danya echoed her doubts, questioning once more whether this course of action was truly safe. Shichiku reiterated the geography. The Swamp of Starvation lay to the south of the capital, beyond the Dragon's Tail mountain range that towered south of the primeval forest of dragon bones. The mountain range served as a natural rampart, and even attempting to detour around it meant traversing treacherous terrain overrun by monsters. Kira remarked that descending underground to surpass towering peaks seemed contradictory to her understanding, yet they stood at the threshold of that very path. Shichiku explained that this location was precisely where the underground world became relevant. The wall before them marked the only accessible entry point into the underground world within the nearby area. He announced that he would now perform a wall clip. Kira questioned what that entailed, while Danya remarked with uneasy familiarity, recognizing it as one of his unusual techniques. Shichiku reassured them that the wall clip at this spot was simple enough for even beginners. He instructed them to follow his example carefully. First, a wooden box had to be placed where a chair would normally be positioned. Then, one would sit on the box and turn to face the wall without standing. From that seated position, all that remained was to rise. Kira, witnessing the act for the first time, let out a startled cry as Shichiku vanished before her eyes. Danya calmly explained that he had passed through to the other side of the wall and that they needed to do the same. She seated herself on the box, turned toward the wall, and stood. In an instant, she too disappeared. Kira stared in disbelief, shaken by the sight of even Ida accomplishing such a feat. With trembling resolve, Kira closed her eyes, sat on the box, and imitated their actions. When she opened her eyes again, the world had transformed. Everything now stretched above them in an inverted, disorienting manner. Shichiku announced a time check of 4 minutes and 42 seconds. Overwhelmed, Kira demanded to know what this place truly was. Shichiku clarified that it lay beyond the game's polygons, an area commonly referred to as the underground world. The explanation only deepened her dizziness, as it clarified nothing in terms she could comprehend. Without warning, her foot slipped. The ground beneath her offered no visible support. Shichiku reacted instantly, seizing her hand before she could fall. Kira glanced downward into the abyss below. After pulling her back to safety, Danya asked anxiously if she was unharmed. Shichiku warned them that the invisible floor in the underground world was riddled with gaps. Should they fall into one, they would remain trapped in a perpetual falling state. In essence, falling meant death. The gravity of the danger left both Kira and Danya stunned. Shichiku immediately began running, urging them to follow closely behind him. A shortcut lay just ahead, and he asked them to endure until they reached it. The two women hesitated, struggling to steady themselves on the unseen footing. Danya murmured something under her breath, but suddenly slipped, tumbling forward until Kira caught and pulled her back. Shichiku apologized inwardly, realizing that this was not a solo game run. He could not proceed as he normally would. He proposed that they move together while holding hands. He grasped Danya's hand, and Danya held on to Kira's. At 6 minutes and 2 seconds, the three of them ran in unison across the treacherous expanse. As they moved, Kira and Danya could not help but reflect that this was not the kind of danger they had anticipated. It was alien, abstract, and merciless. At 8 minutes and 2 seconds, Shichiku declared that they had arrived. Before them lay the shortcut, an unnatural current of water suspended in this distorted realm. Kira muttered skeptically that water was still water. Danya urged her to remain composed. Shichiku explained that this current originated from the source of the Momoga River, which flowed to the far side of the mountain range. If they entrusted themselves to the stream, it would carry them close to the swamp of starvation almost instantly. Kira faltered at the word entrusted, while Danya asked directly whether he intended for them to leap into it. Shichiku assured them that there was no cause for panic. The flow was so rapid that they would reach their destination before drowning. More importantly, he insisted that this method was safer than continuing across the invisible floor. Danya questioned whether his definition of safety had become distorted. Shichiku fidgeted with urgency, pointing out that they had already lost considerable time. If they did not hurry, Ein's life would remain in grave danger. Danya remarked that he had played dirty. With no further delay, the three of them leapt into the current. Far to the south, at the base of the Dragon's Tail mountain range, a remote village rested in quiet isolation. A young girl accompanying a shepherd happened to be nearby when she noticed three figures being swept along the river. Alarmed, she feared they were drowning. At that same moment, Shichiku and the others were expelled from the torrent and landed safely upon solid ground. Shichiku announced that they had successfully wall-clipped out of the underground world and arrived at the southern side of the Dragon's Tail mountain range. Only a short distance remained before reaching the swamp of starvation. Kira confessed that the ordeal had left her feeling as though she were no longer alive. Danya dryly added that it was an astonishing experience considering they could not even perceive the ground beneath them. The village girl ran toward them in concern, calling out to ask whether they were unharmed. Kira wondered aloud whether the girl lived in the area. Shichiku's expression shifted instantly to alarm. He ordered them to run immediately and not to think, only to flee. Without hesitation, they dashed away from the approaching girl, leaving her bewildered and questioning whether she had somehow frightened them. As they ran, Shichiku explained that they had just narrowly avoided disaster. That encounter had been the most dangerous segment of the entire speedrun. Danya looked utterly confused by this claim. Kira questioned whether the girl was another entity like the slime. Shichiku denied it firmly. The girl was human, an exceptionally kind and ordinary one. The problem lay elsewhere. By traversing the mountain range through the underground world, they had bypassed numerous events they were meant to experience. They had skipped necessary steps. In such a situation, even speaking to the girl, or progressing into what he described as the third paragraph of events, would cause the flag checker to spiral out of control. Kira demanded clarification. Danya insisted he explain in terms they could comprehend. Shichiku elaborated that the flags governing this region were unusually strict. He was already unsettled because the timing of their appearance differed from the usual sequence. If they interacted with the girl, the chain of causality and the timeline would unravel. The result would not merely be a glitch, it would trigger a crash. The game would fail, and the world itself would collapse. Kira and Danya stood frozen at the implication. Shichiku added that it was strange to even speak of flag checkers when they had already defeated the final boss ahead of sequence. Regardless, the chill he felt moments ago had been genuine. Kira fixed him with a grim expression, and Danya angrily rebuked him for resorting to such recklessly dangerous methods. At 12 minutes and 39 seconds, Shichiku insisted that they were now safe. Danya shot back furiously that safety after the fact was no excuse. Shichiku argued that if they did not reach Ein as quickly as possible, Kira cut him off sharply, declaring that invoking Ein's name would not absolve him of responsibility. Danya demanded that he provide a safe method, even if it was not the fastest. Meanwhile, in a distant place where the air was thick and stagnant, the sound of bats echoed faintly. The swamp of starvation loomed in silence. From the earth itself, Raspy emerged. His gaze settled upon something before him. Raspy declared that he felt 100 times healthier than before. He complained about the female knight, finding her utterly irritating, and concluded that he would need to acquire some black holes of his own. With that thought, he turned and walked toward Ein. He considered what to do with his captive. The hostage was supposed to be Ida, the saintess of salvation. Raspy had originally wanted the kitty as leverage, imagining it would be satisfying to hold someone so cute and valuable. Now, however, he would need to report the situation to Morphomet. The mere thought disgusted him, and his irritation toward the female knight resurfaced. Ein suddenly spoke, stating that since Raspy had abducted him personally, he should take responsibility for dealing with him. Raspy blinked in surprise and searched for the source of the voice. Ein clarified that it was indeed him speaking and questioned who else could possibly be present. Raspy was taken aback by the saintess's coarse language. Suspicious, Raspy examined the supposed saintess more closely and lifted the skirt. Shock overtook him when he discovered that the captive was a man. He grabbed Ein's face roughly, observing that the saintess and this person bore a resemblance. He questioned whether this was a body double and noted that it did not appear to be an illusion created by magic. Ein retaliated by using magic to slice at Raspy's hand, ordering him not to touch him. After the strike, Ein's strength faltered and he slumped. Raspy muttered that it hurt, recognizing the distinctive power of Falschlaw in the attack. He concluded that royal blood indeed flowed within Ein. Seizing Ein by the neck, Raspy declared him worthless, asserting that such resistance had not affected him in the slightest. Ein would never have been exposed as a body double had he simply remained silent. Ordinarily, someone in his position would have continued pretending to be genuine. Raspy mocked Ein's judgment, calling even his mind defective. Ein responded by spitting at Raspy. Raspy's eyes widened in disbelief. Despite the swelling forming on his cheek and his strength fading, Ein smirked and insulted Raspy in return. Enraged, Raspy struck him. Ein's face swelled further as he slumped, panting heavily, his vision beginning to blur. Raspy paused and labeled him impudent. There was no reason for the otherworld hero to come to this place for the sake of a mere body double. Concluding that the hostage held no value, Raspy decided he would simply kill Ein for being troublesome. He remarked that he might have treated him kindly had he behaved obediently. Ein possessed a pleasing face, though it was now badly bruised. As his consciousness wavered, Ein thought that this might truly be the end. He fleetingly regretted not indulging in certain reckless impulses earlier, yet ultimately resigned himself to his fate. Perhaps it was better to die before Ida arrived. That person had always been. An explosion suddenly erupted behind Raspy, cutting off the moment. Raspy turned in shock. Ein, barely conscious, struggled to comprehend what was happening. At 16 minutes and 52 seconds, the three of them arrived. Shichiku greeted them calmly. Raspy stared in disbelief at the sudden appearance of the otherworld hero. He questioned how it was possible, as Shichiku had not been there moments before. Ein, stunned despite his condition, could only think that it had been far too fast.